Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business is time for reflection, and our time for reflection leader today is Jess Pepper, founder director of Climate Cafe, hosts of the Global Climate Cafe Network.
Thank you. Happy New Year. It is an honour to join you, to quote from Edwin Morgan's poem, to open the doors on a new year and to look ahead in this building that is more than a building. A new year can allow us to see a bigger picture, appreciate this precious envelope of the natural world that sustains life, and reflect on the significance of this moment. Our Goldilocks planet is not too hot or too cold for all life it sustains. If I had a globe in my hands, our atmosphere could be represented by a layer of varnish. It is so thin. Millions of tonnes of global warming pollution dumped in our atmosphere every day are thickening it, trapping more heat, causing more devastating impacts as natural systems are disrupted. Storms intensify, droughts deepen, temperatures rise, health suffers. As Christmas lights twinkled here in December 2014, I saw Save the Children in the Philippines reminding families to put labels in their children's clothing. As Super Typhoon Ruby, charged by increased heat in the ocean, headed towards them. Just a year after 6,300 lives were lost and millions devastated by Typhoon Yolanda. In 2024, their typhoon season saw 6 consecutive storm systems. From tropical cyclones to storms in Scotland, the most vulnerable suffer the worst and increasingly devastating impacts, having polluted least. 2025 marks 10 years since the world came together in Paris to make a global plan to reduce emissions. In 2020, the global panel of climate scientists warned there was a decade left to act to avoid being locked into the most devastating impacts of climate disruption. 2025, the midpoint for that decade of critical action, the cusp of 2 possible futures. Will we accelerate disruption and systems collapse, or realise a vision of a fair, safe future for all? No time for denial or despair. Despite challenges, there is hope and optimism for this vision. It is a choice. The solutions exist, and transition to a cleaner economy is gathering momentum across communities, connected across regions, states, nations, despite barriers that could be removed. I see momentum through a growing global network of community-led climate cafes, often led and informed by the youngest, women and our elders. Carbon dioxide emitted today can remain in the atmosphere for 100 years. We may all be able to make some choices in what we do now and leave as our legacy for future generations. In this place, your decisions can enable everyone to have more choices. So, in 2025, as we return to open the doors in this great building, don't let your work and hope be other than great. The significance of this moment is huge, and our choices will define the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 16025 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to today's business. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16025 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is topical questions. And at question number 1, I call Ben Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is responding to reported increases in instances of youth crime and antisocial behaviour.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I take this opportunity to wish you a Happy New Year and all members of the Scottish Parliament a Happy New Year. I was, of course, appalled to learn of the recent criminal incidents in the member's constituency, and I know that police are actively investigating to identify those that are responsible. The Scottish Government remain committed to preventing children from getting involved in offending behaviour and taking action to stop any re-offending when they do. We work with partners to deliver a range of activities. For example, we expanded the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit's work and delivered knife crime prevention education to practitioners and young people across Scotland. I know it is of cold comfort to victims, but recorded crime is down 40% since 2006 to 2007. And as of the 4th of November, Police Scotland has reached 16,600 officers, with further intakes planned throughout the year. And in 2025 to 2026, we will increase police funding to £1.62 billion. And additionally, the First Minister will host a cross-party youth violence summit next Monday, the 13th.
Ben Macpherson.
I thank the Minister for that answer and welcome the initiatives underway, particularly the last point that was mentioned. And I just want to say, first of all, I raise these issues in Parliament with no enthusiasm, but feel I must do on behalf of those I represent. As was referenced last year in my constituency, I received correspondence about many very concerning instances of youth crime and antisocial behaviour, including threatening people with weapons like axes and knives, theft and robbery, unprovoked and sometimes very harmful assaults on other young people and passers-by, the harassment of women and girls and vulnerable people, dangerous driving of motorbikes, e-bikes, push bikes and scooters, clipping pedestrians, stealing phones and generally causing alarm to pedestrians and drivers. And all of these things usually done while wearing menacing balaclavas and with a sense of being above the law. This is a very, very small minority of Scotland's young people who are engaging in this criminality, but I worry that the problem is growing and it is now very serious in Edinburgh. It's increasing in frequency and the severity of violence is worsening. I've received almost weekly, very worrying correspondence from the communities I serve in recent months. And for example, in December, a mother and daughter were reportedly attacked by a gang in Leith. And just before Christmas, a boy was stabbed by a gang of youths elsewhere in Edinburgh. And the issues around bonfire night are well known. A trend is emerging in Edinburgh, and I know, unfortunately, it's happening elsewhere in Scotland too.
I will have to ask you to get to the question. Thank you.
Sure. Therefore, I would be grateful if the Scottish Government could outline, beyond what's happening next week, which I very much welcome, how it intends to respond to this situation in 2025.
Minister.
Thank you. The incidents the member has mentioned today are totally unacceptable. But the member is right, it is a very small minority, but I very much recognise the impact on those directly affected as well as the communities that are affected, and therefore the need for continued relentless focus to tackle any rise in violence. Addressing the root causes of crime, undertaking effective preventive and diversionary activity and ensuring appropriate enforcement are critical to safeguarding our communities, which is why, for example, the Scottish Violent Reduction Unit have been working to develop a community of practice for over 100 police school liaison officers across Scotland, and the independent working group on antisocial behaviour that I established is also expected to publish its findings shortly, and we have committed to act on its recommendations.
Ben Macpherson.
I welcome that because unfortunately a trend is emerging, exacerbated by social media, sometimes enabled and encouraged by adults and potentially influenced by organised crime. And as I appreciate the Minister's reassurance to Parliament there and the public that the Government will use its convening abilities and I hope also its legal powers backed up with necessary resources to support Police Scotland officers, other statutory services and youth workers, and to focus efforts across agencies to tackle youth crime and antisocial behaviour this year. I think the fact that the First Minister is convening the meeting next week is really significant. If following that, and it would be appropriate, I would be grateful if the Minister could consider also hosting a meeting in Victoria Quay in Leith, in my constituency, with key stakeholders and partners to discuss the situation further and how we tackle it together.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I am very happy to discuss with the member having a meeting at Victoria Quay in the future. Our priorities are also reflected in the budget, which, if it is passed, will increase police funding to $1.62 billion to support the capacity and capability, including almost $57 million in additional resource funding. As I had previously said, on the 4th of November last year, Police Scotland did confirm that the service had reached 16,600 officers, and our priorities are also reflected in the budget. And if the MSPs back the Scottish Government's budget, an additional £3 million will be made available to Police Scotland to help to tackle retail crime specifically. Good collaboration between partners is essential to tackle this issue effectively, and we're also ensuring bespoke interventions and supports are also provided through social work and third sector interventions such as the Incledum's ADAPT programme supporting children and their families involved in offending. We also continue to support the Cashback for Communities programme funded by money recovered through the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, and we are investing in projects helping to deliver a positive future for our children and young people.
Thank you. We have a lot of interest in this item as ever, and I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses to enable more members to be involved. And I call Sharon Dowie.
Presiding Officer, the impact of youth crime and shoplifting in retailers is worse than ever. The organisation Retailers Against Crime say losses to stores last year were at their highest since 1997. They are also in no doubt as to why this is. They've told me that because there are little or no consequences from the courts for shop theft, criminals feel free to reoffend at will. These people are dangerous, organised criminals who not only steal but attack and intimidate staff and shoppers. There have been multiple incidents already in 2025. As it stands, the only ones facing the consequences from the violence and abuse are the retailers and the victims. Meanwhile, the perpetrators get off scot-free. When will the Scottish Government show some common sense and get tough on these individuals so they know that their actions will have consequences?
Minister.
Thank you. The Scottish Government totally recognise the significant disruption and harm that retail crime causes, and we condemn any violence against retail workers and recognise their vital role in our society and want to ensure that they are protected. The Protection of Retail Workers Scotland Act created a statutory offence of threatening, abusing or assaulting a retail worker, ensuring that the seriousness of this behaviour is highlighted. We support the innovative Scottish Partner Against Acquisitive Crime led by Police Scotland and retailers, and we encourage retailers to report all crimes to the police and engage with the innovative Scottish Partnership Against Inquisitive Crime led by Police Scotland and retailers. Our budget if it is approved by this Parliament, will make an extra £3 million available in 25 to 26 to tackle retail crime.
Martin Whitfield.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the Government's commitment to avoid the involvement in youth crime and antisocial behaviour by young people. So can she confirm that she will recognise the crucial role that youth work plays in addressing youth crime and antisocial behaviour? And I know that she won't acknowledge this, but there has been a detrimental impact because of government cuts. So should youth work become a statutory footing for young people to avoid their involvement in youth crime?
Minister.
Thank you. And the increase in the Scottish Government's budget to local authorities will assist with youth community projects. One of the things is also our hugely successful Cashback for Communities programme, which supports young people most at risk of being drawn into antisocial behaviour, offending and re-offending. And it delivers positive outcomes of future work in all the 32 local authorities across Scotland and prioritise giving opportunities to young people aged between 10 to 25 in the bottom 20% of the most deprived areas in Scotland.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Adults commit antisocial behaviour too, and the Minister will recall my exchanges with the First Minister on the floor of this Parliament about the scourge of antisocial behaviour by adults driving high-performance vehicles around the village of South Queensferry in my constituency. I'm very grateful to the First Minister for his engagement on this topic, and he assured me that we were making progress towards the establishment of a national task force oversight group that was going to be chaired by the Minister. I wonder if she can update Parliament on the progress towards that group.
Minister. Yes, thank you. I do know that Mr Doris and yourself, we are meeting with Police Scotland, Mr Fairley and others in the future, and we will be including other members in the future on a working group for the off-road vehicles to see how we can look into this antisocial behaviour.
Thank you. Question number 2, Pam Gosal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its progress in tackling child sexual abuse in light of the reported calls for a full UK national inquiry into child sexual abuse by grooming gangs.
Minister Natalie Dawn-Innes.
Child sexual abuse and exploitation are abhorrent crimes which have devastating impacts on victims. Now, we are taking direct action through the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, the terms of reference for which were established following extensive public consultation with survivors of in-care child abuse. The inquiry is considering the current legislative policy and practice framework to prevent and address child abuse and will set out where it considers changes are required. Now, given the importance of these issues, we are not waiting for the inquiry to report and have established a child sexual abuse and exploitation national strategic group in October 24 with operational partners and other expert stakeholders, including the former chair of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, Professor Alexis Jay, to review current actions and agree where additional focus is needed to better protect children from abuse and exploitation.
Gosal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for the answer. Let me make it clear that this is not my intention to label any ethnic groups, but rather to shed a light on this issue as a whole, rather than leaving it to people like Elon Musk. Presiding Officer, the stories we hear from young girls that were victims of grooming gangs are heartbreaking, and I would like to use this moment to thank all the brave survivors for coming forward. In 2020, in the Barnardos, Scotland, and the Scottish Children's Reporter Administration launched the first national study of child sexual exploitation in Scotland. It's now been more than 4 years since the report was published. The report made 15 recommendations, many of which were for the Scottish Government. Therefore, I'd like to ask the Minister how many of the report's recommendations has the Scottish Government implemented?
Minister.
We have made progress in delivering the outcomes sought by Barnardo's report, which made recommendations for a number of agencies involved in the response to child sexual abuse in Scotland. For the Scottish Government's part, this includes public-facing campaigns on child sexual abuse and, more recently, on the risk of online sexual exploitation, remaining committed to the promise and its transformative support for families in need, established a national contextual safeguarding group supported by Child Protection Committee Scotland, and continuing to embed care and risk management processes to assist local authorities with identification, assessment and management of children displaying harmful sexual behaviour. Now, improving understanding of childhood sexual abuse and exploitation is essential, but any data must be gathered in a manner that minimises the risk of re-traumatisation of victims. Data about reported concerns of child abuse or neglect is collected by Police Scotland and reported nationally in a monthly dashboard. And this data set is currently being extended, which will provide a more in-depth analysis of characteristics and trends in abuse and exploitation. Improvements in training have also been carried out by the Scottish Children's Reporter Administration, with child sexual exploitation is now addressed within Children's Panel members' pre-service training.
Pam Gosal.
Whilst recent attention has been on grooming gangs in towns down south, I echo Kemi Badenoch's calls for a national inquiry. It would be wrong to think we are immune from this problem in Scotland. Major police investigations, Operation Dash and Operation Cotswold, have uncovered grooming gangs operating right here in Scotland. A third investigation, known as Operation Serrar, revealed the existence of yet another grooming gang, but despite this investigation taking place in 2016, it appears to have been covered up for 4 years before the brave work of journalists revealed its existence in the public back in 2020. So, can the Minister confirm if she is aware of any ongoing police investigations into grooming gangs in Scotland? And if there is to be a national inquiry into grooming gangs, will the Scottish Government do its bit to help facilitate its work?
Minister.
As I said at the beginning, this is an extremely serious matter, and I'm sure that the member is aware that I am not able to comment on ongoing police issues or police activity. Now, as I've already stated, the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is ongoing, and its terms of reference were established following extensive public consultation with survivors of in-care child abuse. The terms of reference task the inquiry with investigating the nature and the extent of the abuse of children in care in Scotland, and include tasking the inquiry with identifying any systemic failures that allowed that abuse to happen. Again, I am very clear that this inquiry is independent, and it is the responsibility of its chair, Lady Smith, to decide on exactly what is examined by the inquiry to fulfil its full terms of reference. Now, the Scottish Government will carefully consider any recommendations made by the inquiry to improve the protection of children in Scotland. However, as I've already set out, evidence from inquiry hearings and its findings are already being considered as part of ongoing improvement work, and the Scottish Government are making a number of moves across government to improve and support children and young people who may be at risk of this.
Thank you. Again, concise questions and responses would be appreciated. I call Claire Hawley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In her earlier answer, the Minister spoke of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation National Strategic Group, which has been set up by the Scottish Government. Can the Minister update Parliament on how she envisages this group will both support survivors of sexual abuse as well as prevent and tackle child sexual exploitation? And can she provide details on the issues that they will be looking into this year?
Minister.
Absolutely. So, as I've already set out, the Scottish Government is already working closely with partners to deliver a coordinated multi-agency response to preventing child sexual abuse and exploitation. However, in recognition of that need to go further, we've established this new group to provide that national leadership and further improve our shared response in Scotland to child sexual abuse and exploitation. Now, the group met on the 18th of November and again on the 11th of December, and it brings together key stakeholders, including social work, police, health and education, local authority reps, expert practitioners, charities, research and academics. And as I've stated, it includes the former chair of the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. Now, the group will share outputs of its discussions shortly, but I am pleased to report that there was significant progress made at the first meetings towards identifying some potential priorities, and work is now underway to further explore these priorities with the aim of identifying actions for the group's consideration when it meets again in the coming months.
Colleen McNeill.
Scotland has had its own sexual abuse scandals involving children, and one of the well-reported cases, Operation Planet, were an investigation into alleged abuse of young boys recruited for sex work, many of who were in care. It is not included by the inquiry. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the First Minister, John Swinney, who has been personally dedicated to this historical child sex abuse over many years. I wrote to Lady Smith last year to ask for the inclusion of these types of cases of children in care who were abused, who are currently not. I hope to have the Minister's support for that. But can I also ask the Minister to confirm that their commitment can continue to invest in the survivors of child abuse, gives the support and the practical support of those adults who have survived child sex abuse?
Minister.
Thank you. So, as I made clear in my previous answer, the inquiry is independent, and as I know the member alluded to, it is responsibility of its chair, Lady Smith, to decide on what is exactly examined by the inquiry. Now, I didn't catch the member's full question, but I believe it alluded to support for victims of this behaviour. Now, I have already laid out some of the actions that the Scottish Government are taking to support victims, to look at what more actions can be taken to support victims. I would also just draw the member's attention to our ongoing investment and commitment to Bairnshouse, which is transforming victims' access to the services that they need. And I'm happy to pick these further discussions up with the member if she would like.
Ms Regan.
Officer, there are, of course, parallels here with other areas of child safeguarding failures, where whistleblowers have been vilified, intimidated and shut down. And a civilised society must not rely on the bravery of a few number of whistleblowers. It's the government's role to make sure that the system supports people like the police, like the social workers, like the care home staff, to do the right thing. These girls were failed at every turn by a system that was meant to protect them, even in some cases criminalised for their own abuse, which is sickening. My unbuyable bill allows for a debate and a vote on commercial sexual exploitation, placing the shame where it belongs on the perpetrator. So can the Scottish Government give assurances that this has not and is not happening in Scotland? And is the Government confident there has been no such cover-up here?
Minister.
I think I've been very clear today that although I have set out what the Government are doing to tackle this, that I am aware that there is still a way to go to fully provide the support and eradicate this behaviour. So as I said, the working group has been set up, the inquiry is ongoing, there are actions being taken that will help with this situation. If the member would like to discuss any matters specifically with me in terms of, other things that we could be doing to help with this, then I would be more than happy to pick that up with the member.
Thank you. My apologies to those members we've not been able to reach. That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is a statement by Neil Gray on health and social care response to winter. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to update the Scottish Parliament on how our health and social care system is responding to the pressures of winter. It is clear our health and social care services and the people they serve are experiencing the impact of peak winter demand. It's traditionally a challenging period of the year, and this year has been no different. In particular, the NHS continues to see significant numbers of cases of influenza A, which have been and remain very high. This extraordinary flu surge, of course, adds to the normal respiratory issues we might expect at this time of year. In the face of this particular issue and the wider winter pressures, I would first like to express how enormously grateful I, and I am sure everyone in this chamber is, to all those working in our health and social care settings for their immense efforts over the busy festive period. The resilience and determination shown by staff in the face of pressures across the health and care sector is inspiring. There is so much to thank them for. Every part of our health service has gone above and beyond to serve the country during the hardest months of the year. I thank the ambulance service staff for their sacrifice and devotion to their task by staying at work beyond the end of their shift as they wait to turn around at hospitals. I thank the social care staff doing extra shifts to make up for staff being off sick with flu, GPs working at the weekends to offer appointments and bolster the resilience of the entire system, hospital staff like the porter I met at St John's in Livingston on Christmas Eve, working so hard to turn around beds as quickly as possible. We in this chamber often talk about service, but this is the reality of public service. The hard work, relentless work, skilled, devoted, dedicated work to serve the people that need it most. Presiding Officer, we owe all of them a debt of gratitude. With the First Minister in recent days and weeks, I have been meeting with health boards, representatives from the Scottish Ambulance Service, Health and Social Care Partnerships, Public Health Scotland and NHS 24. We have discussed the latest system updates, the high cases of influenza and how the health service is responding to increased demand. I'm very encouraged to hear about the collaborative working right across the system with strong leadership and staff supporting one another. In practice, this cooperation has seen boards working closely with the Scottish Ambulance Service to manage the flow of patients through emergency departments across Scotland. The Scottish Ambulance Service and board senior clinical managers have been present on hospital sites, assessing risk and prioritising patients most in need of urgent treatment. GPs from out-of-hours services have been working in minor injuries departments and helping to treat and discharge patients where clinically appropriate. The Scottish Ambulance Service Integrated Clinical Hub, which receives calls transferred from NHS 24, has calls reviewed by GPs in the call centre. They help to advise self-care, prescribe medication or refer to out-of-hours services when it is clinically appropriate to do so. This helps more patients to be treated at home or in the community and prevent unnecessary ambulance conveyance to hospital. It is this kind of coordination that has helped play an important role in protecting resources for those most urgently in need. I would also want to express my regret that anyone seeking care has to wait longer than necessary to receive it, and I have no doubt that this has happened over this difficult period. But at this point, thanks to the robust preparation and the dedication and hard work of staff across the health service and social care, our service is to continue to hold up well in the face of these additional pressures. This has been so important because there is no doubt Scotland has been hit hard by flu this winter. Whilst we did plan for seeing increases in flu over the winter, the very high levels we are experiencing puts inevitable strain on the system. The latest data from Public Health Scotland shows that the incidence of influenza in the community in Scotland has continued to increase in the latest week, although the rate of increase appears to have slowed. We have seen the impact of flu in our hospitals, where we have seen over 1,500 influenza-related hospital admissions in the latest week, surpassing the peak of around 1,400 in the winter of 2022-23. Presiding Officer, every year the demands of winter challenges our health systems. That is why, in preparation, we published our winter plan a month ahead of last year and earlier than ever before to allow more time for whole system preparedness. Published on the 24th of September, the winter plan was developed with input from the whole health and social care system in partnership with COSLA, bringing together best practice and improvement work to ensure that the most appropriate care is received in the right place and at the right time. Our investment in hospital at home has paid dividends, enabling patients to spend this Christmas in their homes with their families where this is clinically appropriate. This vital service reduces hospital occupancy whilst providing high-quality care. As part of the winter plan, we committed to providing additional staffing within NHS 24 to support demand over the winter period. This recruitment has been a success, with call handlers now at full establishment and additional clinical staffing in post. Health boards have ensured the provision of NHS pharmaceutical services so that people continue to have access to prescribed medicines and services such as NHS Pharmacy First and a range of public health services. Our NHS Pharmacy First Scotland service is also available in all community pharmacies to anyone registered with a GP practice in Scotland. It allows members of the public access to expert healthcare professionals without the need for an appointment. And in these winter planning efforts, We have learned from previous intense winter pressures, and we have built on our approach to out-of-hours services, escalation and board delivery support on this experience. Because of this, out-of-hours services have remained resilient and responsive thanks to continued investment in the service and rigorous planning of staffing cover for winter. The flu vaccination programme runs until the end of March, while the COVID vaccination programme runs until the end of January. And as of the 15th of December, we've administered over 1.2 million adult flu vaccinations. The Scottish Ambulance Service has been instrumental in working collaboratively with boards over the course of the winter vaccination programme. Their mobile vaccination outreach service has provided accessible vaccination to remote, rural and island communities. Vaccination offers the best protection against serious illness from flu, so I urge those who are eligible for vaccinations this winter to please come forward as soon as possible to protect themselves and support health and social care services. Beyond vaccination, Presiding Officer, everyone can also reduce the chance of catching flu or spreading it to others with good hand hygiene and other precautions, and by staying home if you have respiratory symptoms. I've thanked the workforces of our health and social care services and will continue to do so. But I also really want to use this opportunity to thank the Scottish public too for taking heed of messages about accessing the right care in the right place and taking the steps to slow the spread of infections. As I've stated throughout recent weeks, it is very important for everyone to be familiar with the different resources available, including through NHS Inform's online tools that can help you get appropriate health advice as quickly as possible. People should always call 999 in a life-threatening emergency, but if this is not the case, please visit nhsinform.scot or call NHS24 on 111 first. I must thank those people who are looking after or even just looking out for other people. Those who have checked in on elderly relations or friends, those who have helped with the messages and provided other support over this time, the hardest time of the year, I am grateful. And I would also like to recognise the role of unpaid carers, the length and breadth of Scotland who work year-round supporting their loved ones. They are often overlooked, the overlooked heroes of our health and social care system. I thank them also. We also want to reiterate this Government's commitment to supporting general practice during this critical time. On the 29th of November, I announced an additional £13.6 million investment in general practice for this financial year. This funding is aimed at addressing financial pressures, supporting staff costs and enabling practices to recruit and retain staff. It's a practical response to the challenges GPs face, especially during this period of high demand. Our dedicated social care and social workforce have worked tirelessly throughout the festive period, supporting people to remain well and live independently in their communities. This proactive support reinforces our health service by preventing the need for hospital admissions at a difficult time, whilst ensuring that individuals are cared for in the most appropriate setting. Care homes have, of course, been affected by flu and in some cases have been required to close in line with infection control procedures. We have engaged with local systems to make sure they have the latest guidance and support on infection control, and I know that they are working collaboratively to manage that pressure. And as with previous years, there has been significant work to reduce the level of delayed discharge across the system in advance of Christmas. Health and social care partnerships have been working hard to try to make sure that as many people as possible who are clinically ready to leave hospital can do that, whether they are returning home or to a care home. This includes maximising the use of discharge to assess, hospital at home and other initiatives that help make sure people can get the right care in the right place. To conclude, Presiding Officer, winter tests every one of us. It tests individual people and families and our healthcare systems. But this year, thanks to the incredible efforts of NHS staff and sure-handed planning, we are facing it with resilience and resolve. And I'm sure the whole Chamber will join me in supporting once again thanking the staff of our NHS and social care services who provide so much to this nation in these difficult and challenging times.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. And I'd be grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. And a declaration of interest is a practising NHS GP who was working over the Christmas period. I would like to start by thanking all staff who provided care for us during the Christmas period. Seems people don't like the fact that I was working over the Christmas period, presiding officer.
Please carry on. Let's hear Dr Gilhani.
Flu is not simply a cold. Flu is a serious and potentially fatal illness, and if you are in a high-risk group, I would urge you to go and get your vaccination. The Cabinet Secretary has boasted of the number of vaccinations delivered, but this actually represents a 25% reduction in vaccinations delivered compared to last year. Now, I've been telling the Cabinet Secretary that his winter plan was not worth the paper it was written on, and this was shown with November's A&E waiting times being the worst on record since 2007 when the SNP came to power. I have two questions, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary said that recruitment for NHS 24 has been a success, but some desperate people calling NHS 24 had to wait over 4 hours, and over 100,000 calls were abandoned due to waiting too long. What is the Cabinet Secretary doing to ensure that 111 has the capacity to deliver? And over the past decade, there's been an almost 10% decrease in the number of rural GP practices, despite the Cabinet Secretary claiming today they are providing accessible treatment for remote, rural and island communities. What assurances can he provide today to rural patients and my rural GP colleagues that these are not just empty words?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Sanders Gilhani for his contribution and indeed his service, and all those GPs and other health and social care staff who contributed to responding to the health and social care pressures that were being faced over Christmas. I recognised in my statement that we have seen general practitioners opening their surgeries at weekends in order to provide support to the whole system, and that, alongside Dr Gilhani's service, has helped to make sure that the resilience has been there both in hours and out of hours. And I also referenced the work that general practitioners have been doing in supporting the Scottish Ambulance Service and NHS 24, as well as flow navigation services. So these are our general practitioners, I've said before, I say it again, are integral to our health and social care system, and I'm very grateful to all those who have worked over the Christmas period to respond to the pressures that we have seen. Dr Gilhani was right to recognise the severity of flu, the impact that that has had on our system. It is clear and it is real. That has been seen by me in terms of the visits that I took part in just before Christmas, and indeed the First Minister has carried out over the weekend. And in terms of the winter plan, I've already pointed to so many of the successful elements of the winter plan that have been delivered thanks to the incredible work of our health and social care providers, such as the expansion of hospital at home, such as the work to ensure that flow navigation centres were providing virtual access to accident emergency services. There is a range of areas within which our winter plan has worked and has ensured that we've been able to respond to what I believe to be unprecedented levels of flu in recent years impacting upon our systems. In terms of NHS 24, the statistics that he quotes around those choosing to relinquish their call, obviously there is a callback service that is in place that will have contributed to some of those people choosing to hang up, but I recognise that for some people they will have had to wait too long, and I apologise for that. But the investment that has been made in NHS 24 to ensure that there was an additional level of staffing available that I was able to see, the First Minister was able to see prior to Christmas, meant that they were able to respond well to an increased level of demand that there has been over the festive period, and I'm very grateful to everybody for the work that they have carried out over this difficult, challenging period.
Jackie Bailey.
Let me start by thanking all health and social care staff, including those working in the third and independent sector as well, for their valiant efforts over Christmas and New Year, despite the lack of vision and support from the SNP government. When the Cabinet Secretary announced his winter plan, there was not a penny extra for delayed discharge. The latest data from October has a record high of 2,000 people stuck in hospital. And whilst I welcome announcements about hospital at home, they relate to the next financial year and will be cold comfort to those waiting to get home now. It's early for a statement on winter pressures, but perhaps the Cabinet Secretary is trying to get ahead of statistics on delayed discharge next week. So can he tell us What is the level of delayed discharge today, and whether it's gone up or down on his watch? Turning quickly to the ambulance service, winter has barely begun and we're seeing real pressure on the system, with ambulances routinely queuing up outside hospitals and a level 4 emergency declared. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what he's done to address this, over and above the winter plan, to support our hard-working paramedics?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to Jackie Baillie for referencing, in addition to those that we've already spoken about, the community and voluntary sector staff that contributes so much to our health and social care services, providing access to and reaching people that statutory services can't. So I recognise and thank Jackie Baillie for referencing them. Hospital at Home is operating now and has been increased in this financial year. It is something that is an innovation that is right for patients. It allows people to remain in their homes. It's right for our health and social care services. And should our budget pass, it means that by the end of the next financial year, we will see hospital at home beds expanded to become the largest hospital in Scotland, because it is innovation that works. Delayed discharge figures are going to be published tomorrow, and she'll understand why I cannot preempt what is to be within them. In terms of the ambulance service, she's absolutely right that our ambulance service has faced unprecedented demands upon its services. For Jackie Baillie's argument to hold water, though, she has to pretend that ambulance services elsewhere in the UK have also not faced unprecedented challenges. The critical incident that was announced in Wales and various hospital trusts elsewhere in England point to this being a shared challenge that has been faced because of flu this year. And I was incredibly heartened by the conversation that I was able to have with Wes Streeting and other health ministers across the four nations just before Christmas around what we need to do around reform and improvement, because I believe that there are shared areas we are looking to invest in, which is around shifting the balance of care, around reducing hospital occupancy, reducing the length of stay within hospitals, and reducing delayed discharge, because it is that is causing the choking of our systems, that are meaning that our ambulance service staff, for whom I'm very grateful for, are struggling to be able to convey patients into hospitals. So I'm not absolving responsibility of the situation that's been faced here. What I'm trying to point out is the context to Ms Baillie, which I know she will be aware of, as others across the country are as well.
Thank you. I'm very keen to enable as many members as possible to put questions, and concise questions and responses are required. And I call Fulton McGregor to be followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday I met with GPs and the practice manager at the Atrium Medical Centre in Coatbridge. I was given a demonstration of a typical day at this busy GP practice and heard about the pressures being faced all year, and particularly during these difficult winter months. So can I therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary what support there is for GPs in their role in response to winter pressures, and what opportunities there are for GPs to feed their concerns into government moving forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Fulton McGregor for his engagement with general practice within his constituency. I'm very heartened to hear that engagement is happening. I also want to reiterate this government's commitment to supporting general practice during this critical time. I referenced in answer to Sanders Colhany the areas that I have seen incredible work by general practitioners over the festive period, and for that I am very grateful. In addition, on the 29th of November, I announced that the BMA's Scottish Local Medical Committee Conference an additional £13.6 million investment in general practice for this financial year. This funding is aimed at addressing financial pressures, supporting staff costs, enabling practices to recruit and retain key staff, and it is a practical response to the challenges that GPs are facing. I frequently meet with the BMA, and my officials have regular meetings with the Scottish GP Committee as well, providing opportunities for GPs to not only raise their concerns but also discuss the opportunities that reform and improvement and shifting the balance of care from secondary into primary has as an opportunity going forward.
Brian Whittle to be followed by Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary talked about ensuring as many people as possible who
who are clinically ready to leave hospital can do that, whether they are returning home or to a care home. But, Presiding Officer, we know that care home places have been cut by a fifth, especially felt in rural areas, at the same time as so many cottage hospitals have been closed. So, Cabinet Secretary, is it little wonder that there is such a strain on hospital admissions with step-down care reduced by so much, with that direct impact on delayed discharge?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of the key areas for the budget that has been proposed for the next financial year is the £100 million of reform and improvement, which is to support the shifting of the balance of care from secondary into primary, but also to provide greater capacity within social care. Because I accept the premise that has been put forward by Brian Whittle, that we need to make sure that there is capacity in all aspects of our service to relieve the pressure that is currently being faced. And I narrated in response to Jackie Bailey the central pressure that has been faced by our ambulance service colleagues has been the inability to convey patients from the ambulance into accident emergency, because our accident emergency staff are unable to move patients from the ED departments into the hospital because patients are not moving on. That is why I encourage MSP colleagues to support the budget, so that we can continue to see that investment happen into social care, so that the capacity is there to meet the demands that there are upon from patients across Scotland.
Audrey Nicholl, to be followed by Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At the end of last year, constituents of mine and of colleagues across this chamber saw first-hand the pressures on A&Es and hospital capacities as NHS Grampian declared a critical incident. So can the Cabinet Secretary outline the steps being taken by the Scottish Government to ensure that, should this occur again in any area of Scotland, that staff and members of the public alike are prepared and, importantly, informed of the best course of action to take to access the care they need?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, and I'm very grateful to Audrey Nicholl for raising this point. The First Minister has chaired meetings with all those representatives that I set out in my statement in order to coordinate and ensure that there was a confidence about the resilience of the system to avoid the situation that Audrey Nicholl has outlined as happened in NHS Grampian. In practice, there has been incredibly strong cooperation between both national and regional boards, working closely with the ambulance service to manage the flow of patients through emergency departments across Scotland. The GPs from out-of-hours services have been working in minor injuries departments to help treat and discharge patients. The Scottish Ambulance Services Integrated Clinical Hub, which receives calls transferred from NHS 24, has been reviewed, has had calls reviewed by GPs in the call centre, so to help advise self-care, prescribe medication or to refer to out of hours. And with regards to critical incidents, health boards operate their own escalation policy for the management of inpatient capacity, and that includes well-established processes with locally agreed trigger points for maintaining a safe service and ensuring patient safety. And actions are widely communicated with staff to ensure they know the appropriate course of action to respond to pressures, and boards can, of course, ask government for advice as and when it is required.
Paul Sweeney, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary said that services are holding up well over this winter, but those words are of little reassurance to many staff and patients, such as my constituent who is in his 80s and had an emergency urology problem on New Year's Day, but was told there were no urology services available all at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and at least the following week. After phoning around, he was advised to attend Glasgow Royal Infirmary's A&E department, but there were no ambulances available for 6 hours, so he had to take a taxi. He was admitted and they phoned to call in an emergency urologist, but this was after hours of agonising pain, confusion and frustration for my constituent. So what assurance can the Cabinet Secretary offer to elderly constituents like mine who are understandably frustrated about the lack of provision of specialist services over the Christmas period when many are at their most vulnerable?
Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Paul Sweeney for raising the case of his 80-year-old constituent. I apologise for the situation that he's faced. I recognised in my statement the fact that there will have been too many people who will have waited for too long over the festive period. The prioritisation and escalation through the winter plan is the point that I was referencing as allowing the system to hold up well in the face of what I believe to be unprecedented levels of flu within the system over compared to recent years. But I recognise that there will have been too many people waiting for too long. I'd be more than happy to receive more information about the situation that Mr Sweeney's constituent faced and ask for more information from Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board so that he can have full information as to what happened in that situation.
Macmillan, to be followed by Gillian Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I understand that a record number of NHS 24 call handlers will support the public to access the most appropriate care this winter as services deal with increased demand. Can the Cabinet Secretary highlight how effective this has been so far this winter and how the Scottish Government will continue to support this service to ensure that patients receive the right care in the right place at the right time?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer. And I thank Stuart Macmillan for raising this point. As part of the winter plan, we committed to providing additional staffing within NHS 24 to support demand over the winter period. This recruitment has been successful, with call handlers now at full establishment and additional clinical staffing in post. A record number of NHS 24 call handlers have been available this winter to direct people to the most appropriate care, helping reduce unnecessary accident emergency attendances. As at the September 2024, NHS 24 had a total of 1,492.3 whole-time equivalent staff in post. Over the last 10 years, the number of staff in post in NHS 24 has increased by 54.5%. In addition to the direct service that's provided by NHS 24, I was able to hear in the most recent visit to NHS 24 before Christmas the work that is provided from there by the breathing space team to support people who find the festive period incredibly challenging from a mental health perspective. And so I'm grateful to all those who have been working across NHS 24 for the work that they have done under considerable pressure from demand across the system.
Gillian Mackay, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. In the last few weeks, winter pressures have meant that we've had several warnings from health boards not to come to A&E unless it's an emergency. For many, minor injury units as an alternative are not as close as their local A&E, and this includes my constituents in Falkirk, where the nearest minor injuries is Stirling. For some, that means passing 2 hospitals, including the A&E, to go to minor injuries, and for many, this just isn't an option. Has the Cabinet Secretary assessed what benefit there may be in opening a minor injuries unit in Falkirk to help relieve pressure, especially during the winter months?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Gillian Mackay for raising this point. I would reiterate the point that I made in my statement around ensuring that people are accessing the right care in the right place, utilising the services that are available through NHS Inform as well as NHS 24. I hear the point that she's made around minor injuries units. That's obviously a decision to be taken by the Forth Valley Health Board, and it's something that I'd be more than happy to facilitate a discussion for Gillian Mackay to have with them around that potential facilitation.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Claire Haughey.
Thanks very much indeed, Presiding Officer. Can I echo the words of the Cabinet Secretary and give thanks to all those who worked over the festive period? This morning, Presiding Officer, we learned that only 58.4% of people who attended A&E in the last week of December were seen within the 4-hour waiting time target. More than 3,000 people waited over 8 hours. That isn't just intolerable for the patients and the staff in our emergency care departments, but it's causing ambulances to stack up outside, unable to discharge their patients, and causing delays to getting emergency care to people who need it urgently in our communities. People are dying as a result of this, and I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary will finally instruct an inquiry into deaths caused by the emergency care crisis.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I recognise the challenge that there is within the system. I've narrated that in response to Jackie Bailey as well as to Sandish Kilhani and others, that we need to come forward with the investment that comes through the budget, the proposed budget, that allows for greater capacity to be afforded within social care, within primary care, to avoid people being admitted to hospital in the first place, and to provide the capacity that allows for our accident emergency departments to be able to deal with patients, as well as our ambulance service to be able to convey patients. That is an issue of hospital occupancy, it's an issue of length of stay, it is an issue issue of delayed discharge, and it's an area that we have prioritised spending within the budget to allow that to happen, and I look forward to MSPs across the chamber supporting that to allow us to ensure that we can provide a situation that allows the improvement of our services. Because I agree with Alex Cole-Hamilton, the situation with regards to our 4-hour standard is not good enough. It's not one that I accept. It's one that we need to see improving. That happens by creating capacity, and that comes through the investment from the budget.
Claire Haughey, to be followed by Annie Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I remind Chamber I'm employed as a bank nurse by Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS. I recognise that there has been increased concern, not just in Scotland, but across the UK regarding the high level of flu infections in all age groups this winter. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what work has been done to encourage uptake of the flu vaccination and what the current rate of uptake is?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer, and I thank Claire Haughey for highlighting a critical area that I would again encourage people, anybody that is eligible for a flu vaccination or a part of any of the vaccination programmes this winter to take the opportunity up. As of the 15th of December, we've administered over 1.2 million adult flu vaccinations and over 517,000 child flu vaccinations. Uptake in the highest risk groups, such as those living in care homes and those aged 75 and over, remains strong, although slightly lower than what we achieved in the winter 2023, with 82% of care home residents and 78% of those aged 75 or over having been vaccinated against flu this winter. Health boards have been heavily advertising their drop-in clinics, with many citizens accessing vaccination over Christmas and New Year, so we do expect these figures to increase when the next round of data is published by Public Health Scotland later this week. And a range of tailored resources and promotional materials have been prepared by PHS and disseminated through partners, including local NHS boards, the community and voluntary sectors, as well as government, to encourage uptakes for all of those eligible.
Annie Wells, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What is the Cabinet Secretary's assessment of the availability of flu vaccine and appointments for those under 65 and not within the at-risk group who want to get a vaccine but simply have been unable to do so?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we've been working with all health boards to ensure that they are providing ready access to people who are eligible to receive a vaccine and to ensure that barriers are removed to people being able to receive a vaccine. I was heartened to hear many health boards seeking to bring vaccination clinics to staff, for instance, to increase staff access to vaccination. And if there are specific examples that Annie Wells has where that has been an issue, then I'd be more than happy to hear it and raise it either with Greater Glasgow and Clyde or indeed any other health board where that is perceived to be an issue.
And Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We know that one of the best ways to reduce the risk of flu and other viruses is for people to take steps to protect themselves, and the Cabinet Secretary has mentioned uptake of vaccines already. And I remind Chamber that my previous role was as a clinical educator in NHS Dumfries and Galloway. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise on what further public health messaging the Scottish Government will utilise to re-emphasise how people can keep themselves safe from flu and other viruses? I'm thinking about infection control and prevention measures as well.
Cabinet Secretary.
I refer again, Emma Harper and colleagues, to the work that's been provided by Public Health Scotland as well as by government around right care, right place, but also the messaging that is so important around making sure people utilise the opportunity to get hold of a vaccination. It is the right thing to do for you yourself in terms of avoiding critical illness. We were hearing from Sandesh Gulhani how serious influenza is, but also how important it is for our health and social care services. The social care services in particular have been impacted by staff absence because of flu, and that is part of the reason why I would encourage anyone who has an eligibility for vaccination to take every step possible to ensure that they are utilising that opportunity before the 31st of March.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement. There will be a moment or two to allow front benches to organise themselves for the next item of business.
Thank you. The next item of business is the debate on motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on First Minister John Swinney to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 13 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I became First Minister, I made it abundantly clear that the foremost priority of my government would be the eradication of child poverty here in Scotland, and I reiterate that commitment today at the start of 2025. There can be no acceptable number of children living in poverty, not in a prosperous modern society like ours. Poverty limits a child's opportunity, their health and their well-being. Its wider impacts stretch across every aspect of our community and span generations. It shackles our economy and it strains our public services. Put bluntly, it holds us all back. So my government will be relentlessly focused on acting to meet the ambitious targets that were agreed unanimously in this Parliament, and I have committed every aspect of my government to achieving them. Indeed, our action is already making a real difference to the lives of families. Modelling published in February estimates that this government's policies will keep 100,000 children out of relative poverty in 24-25, with relative poverty levels 10 percentage points lower than they would otherwise have been. This includes keeping an estimated 60,000 children out of relative poverty through investment in our Scottish Child Payment, a payment that is available to families in Scotland only, that's not available in England and Wales, a key commitment and policy delivered by the Scottish Government. But child poverty is a deeply entrenched systemic problem, one that continues to affect too many children here in Scotland. So we must not only sustain our efforts, we must redouble them, and we must pioneer new and innovative ways of acting to achieve the aims that we have all agreed as a Parliament. In the programme for government in September and in my November speech on my approach to government, I outlined how I propose to use the powers of government to tackle this issue. Not through quick-fix sticking plasters. I favour tackling the root causes of child poverty by working collaboratively within our communities, from the bottom up within our communities. This year's budget makes that approach possible. In it, we commit over £3 billion to a range of actions to tackle poverty and the cost of living for households. Yesterday, I described it as a budget of delivery and hope. I said this because it delivers those things which make the biggest difference to people today, and it lays the foundation for a hopeful future for a Scotland to grow and to prosper for years to come. Because family poverty is child poverty, our approach to delivery addresses those issues that have a direct and immediate impact day in and day out on families in Scotland. That begins with the essentials: warm, safe homes, good jobs, money in people's pockets. Next financial year, we will invest £760 million to boost delivery through the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. This will support housing providers to deliver at least 8,000 properties for social and mid-market rent and low-cost home ownership. It will help to tackle the housing emergency by supporting immediate actions that will return existing housing stock through addressing voids and increasing acquisitions, and ensure that families have secure and affordable homes in which to raise their children. We will also invest an additional £4 million to enable local authorities, frontline services and relevant partners to prepare for new homelessness prevention duties. And because the best, most sustainable route out of poverty is good employment, we are investing up to £90 million for the delivery of devolved employability services. This includes specific funding to continue supporting parents to enter employment and to embed child poverty coordinators within local authorities. And we're investing more than £2.6 billion to support public transport and to make our transport system available, affordable and accessible to all, helping connect parents to employment, training and skills opportunities and the services they need to navigate their way out of poverty. This includes providing £415 million for concessionary bus travel, which enables access to free bus travel for 2.3 million people across all of Scotland. But the cornerstone of our support for families is our investment in social security. Many families are struggling with the cost of living, and this budget provides them with the immediate support for the day-to-day cost of living. We've made the decision to invest roughly £6.9 billion for benefits expenditure. That is almost £1.3 billion over and above what Scotland receives from the United Kingdom Government for social security, and it includes £644 million in benefits and payments that are only available here in Scotland and not available in any other part of the United Kingdom. Of course, I give way.
Elizabeth?
Thank the First Minister for giving way in that respect. With the high cost of the benefits bill, how is that going to be paid for if the Scottish Government cannot produce the economic growth that we so desperately need?
First Minister.
Well, the Government has a fully costed budget that is available for Parliament to scrutinise and to support in February, which provides for the cost that I'm talking about. And the benefit of what the Scottish Government is doing with this investment is that we are helping to keep hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty as a consequence of the investments that we are making, and that's an investment in the economic growth and the future of our country. I mentioned the £644 million in benefits and payments that are available only here in Scotland. Our 5 family payments can be worth over £10,000 by the time an eligible child turns 6, and around £25,000 by the time an eligible child turns 16. This compares to less than £2,000 for families in England and Wales, where support ends when an eligible child turns 4. Last November, Social Security Scotland announced that we have reached the milestone of paying £1 billion to support families through our 5 family payments. And we know from speaking to those families how important this support has been to them. From April, we will enhance that support, increasing all Scottish social security assistance by 1.7% in line with inflation. And our Scottish child payment will increase to £27.15 per child per week, and this coming year it is forecast to support the families of 333,000 children. In total, our investment in social security is expected to support around 2 million people in 25-26. Now, I want to underscore these payments, and this is my response to Liz Smith. I want to underscore that these payments are an investment, not a cost to be borne. They are an investment in Scotland's people, its communities and its future. And I cannot be alone in expressing my concern at the abrupt new direction being set by the Labour leader in Scotland, who suggested yesterday that Labour is now committed to lowering rather than increasing this vital investment in our society. That will consign more children to live in poverty, and that's not the agenda of this Scottish Government. I said at the start that the Government's budget is one of delivery and hope. With it, we are setting a firm foundation for the success of our society and future generations. In the long term, we will realise the greater return on that investment. We will see it in a robust, resilient, well-being economy, one that promotes economic and social equality and decarbonises our communities. But we must make these investments today if we hope to benefit from them tomorrow. This only works if all children are supported to have the best start in life. That's why we are prioritising areas such as early years, childcare and education. With this budget, we are continuing our investment of around £1 billion each year to deliver 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare to all eligible children. We are also providing £9.7 million in additional funding to local authorities to increase the pay of early learning and childcare workers delivering funded childcare to at least the real living wage. This budget includes additional measures to support attainment and address the poverty-related attainment gap, with additional investment of £41 million to local authorities to protect teacher numbers and to bring the number of teachers in Scotland back to 2023 levels. We must also equip children to be successful once they are in school, so we are investing more to enable the expansion of breakfast clubs across Scotland through our Bright Start Breakfast Fund. This will enable us to deliver thousands of new places for primary school children, and we are also expanding free school meals through an investment of £37 million. We will grow the programme to those in receipt of Scottish child payment in primary 6 and 7, helping provide healthy and nutritious meals to around 25,000 more children. We are also providing a further £14.3 million to support the school clothing grant, increasing this vital support for eligible families to at least £120 for primary school pupils and £150 for secondary school pupils. All that I have mentioned, Presiding Officer, so far is key to combating child poverty. It is needed and it is making a tremendous difference every day to children all across Scotland. Of course.
Stephen Kerr. I'm grateful to the First Minister for giving way. In his opening remarks, he talked about the root issues. And one of the root issues he correctly identified is good jobs. Now, good jobs are fuelled by skills. And one of the key engines of skills in this economy is colleges. Why then is the Scottish Government cutting over this year and previous years the amount of resource being expended in our college sector?
First Minister.
Well, what we've got to make sure is that we are able to make the appropriate provision that is necessary for the size and the scale of the population that requires to be educated within our colleges. That will, of course, vary from year to year, depending on levels of employment within the economy. But crucially, what I'm confident about with the budget that we are putting forward is that we have adequate resources to support the employability and skills journeys to enable individuals to move from economic inactivity into employment, but also for individuals who face some of the challenges through, for example, the changes required because of decarbonisation in our economy, that people can acquire the skills that they require to make progress in our economy. Of course.
Willie Rennie.
I mean, the First Minister is setting out what's in the draft budget, but he knows from the announcement today that he is going to get that budget through. I'm interested in whether the discussions now stop or whether his door is open, because we have many more ideas we'd like to include in the budget. So what is this position now with regards to discussion about the budget?
First Minister.
I take nothing for granted about the budget process. So the discussions which have been constructively engaged in by the Liberal Democrats, by the Greens, by the Labour Party, by ALAPA and by the Conservatives will continue to make sure there is a parliamentary majority for the budget, because I am interested in taking as many members of Parliament with me as possible in putting in place a unifying budget that will meet the needs of the people of Scotland, and the contribution of Mr Rennie and his colleagues will be welcome in that process. And just for the record, despite what's said on Good Morning Scotland in the morning, I wait until I hear the words from the presiding officer that stage 3 of the budget has passed before I rest easy on these questions. Presiding officer, one of the key elements of the government's budget is about maximising the interventions and actions that we can take to eradicate child poverty. And one of the proposals that we have brought forward is the determination to take the steps to remove the two-child limit, which has been a pernicious attack on some of the most vulnerable within our society. Analysis from the Child Poverty Action Group estimates that abolishing the two-child cap in Scotland could lift 15,000 children out of poverty. Everyone here knows my preferred solution to this challenge. As an independent country, we should be able to take these decisions, to have the economic and fiscal levers that other governments should be exercising to tackle inequalities. But where that is not undertaken, we will do all we can with the measures that we have in place to address this issue. So, in the coming financial year, we will commit £3 million to develop systems to mitigate the two-child cap in 2026. This is alongside other investments that we are making to mitigate United Kingdom government policies like the bedroom tax that should have been removed by a Labour government but continue to be a burden, and this government will stand alongside those who need its support in addressing the impacts of child poverty. Presiding Officer, in drawing my remarks to a conclusion, the draft budget for 25-26 prioritises wide-ranging action to eradicate child poverty now and in the future. It is a statement of our intent to deliver real, lasting progress for the children and families of Scotland. It is a budget of delivery and hope. And to address some of the points that Mr Rennie has just put to me, I am acutely aware that this government operates in a minority position. But the whole of this Parliament has supported legislation which puts in place targets to significantly reduce child poverty. So we need to reach parliamentary agreement to enable us to make progress on those objectives and on those legislative requirements. So I invite members of Parliament, regardless of their politics, regardless of their views on other questions, to recognise that at the heart of this budget is the most ambitious set of measures we can put in place to eradicate child poverty within the resources available to us. And if we are all going to be true to our commitment in legislation to eradicate child poverty, I invite members of Parliament in all political parties to support the budget and do everything we can to eradicate child poverty. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, First Minister. I now call on Russell Finlay to speak to and to move Amendment 16003.4. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Everyone here wants to reduce and hopefully eradicate child poverty. And what we are debating today is how best to achieve that, and that is where we differ. John Swinney and Anas Sarwar, who's not with us today, they believe in the big state approach. High taxes, central control, rules and regulations, layers of bureaucracy, and spending ever more taxpayers' money. The trouble is, that approach has been tried and it has failed. It's been the approach of the SNP for 18 years, and before that, Labour. The old left-wing approach has not worked. Poverty has not been reduced, our economy has not grown stronger, people don't feel better off, prosperity has not been spread across the country, and opportunities to get ahead remain far too limited. The old approach of the SNP and Labour too often only managed to keep people stuck in poverty. I will.
Paul O'Kane.
Is Russell Finlay genuinely trying to get the rest of the Chamber to agree that he, as an ardent supporter of Liz Truss, should be trusted in terms of how to support and grow the economy and lift people out of poverty? Is he genuinely asking us to take him seriously on that point?
Russell Finlay.
Come on, Paul Kane should know better. Liz Truss was in power 50 days. This lot have been in power for 18 years. Now, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And that's why my party believes that a different approach, I shall, yes.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Finlay for giving way. If he won't address the issue about Liz Truss, does he consider that the agenda of austerity that was pursued consistently from 2010 to 2024 by the Conservative government helped or hindered the battle against poverty?
Russell Finlay.
John Swinney has squandered countless millions, if not billions of pounds on his absolute incompetence. And that's why my party believes a different way is not only possible but necessary for Scotland. We believe the way to tackle poverty is with a hand up, not a hand out. The safety net of social security is essential, but it should help people back onto their feet, not keep them trapped in benefits. We believe the fundamental starting point in tackling poverty is through provision of a good education. Education opens the door to opportunity. This is the gateway to well-paid employment and a better life of prosperity. Under this government, Scotland's once world-leading education system is failing. And in Scotland today, there's too little value placed on aspiration, on ambition and on success. Those who create jobs and wealth are treated with disdain, sometimes even hostility. We need to create the right environment, an environment of universal good education, opportunity for all, the championing of aspiration. We believe in giving people the tools and the platform to succeed by their own efforts. I believe the smart, creative and industrious people of Scotland are capable of that if given the chance. John Swinney, Anas Sarwar and the left-wing parties at Holyrood don't seem to share my faith. Too often, their answer is to throw yet more money at the problem in the hope that it all goes away. They seek to take control of people's lives and take ever more of people's hard-earned wages to squander on ineffective governance. The SNP and Labour hold the mistaken belief that Holyrood knows best. They don't seem to realise how little difference the Scottish Parliament has made to people's lives. They don't appear to grasp Their ideology has held back, not helped, the people of Scotland. Take the criminal justice system. Under 25s are told they're unlikely to be sent to prison. This results in some young people, especially in areas of deprivation, being lured into a life of crime, according to Police Scotland. Detective Superintendent Andy Patrick said, and I'll quote you directly, "Organised crime groups are exploiting this policy. They are coercing young and vulnerable people to carry out some of these crimes because they are under reduced risk of imprisonment." No wonder so many people across this country have concluded that Scotland's political establishment just don't get it. They've lost faith in politicians and lost trust in politics. The public feels that nobody represents them anymore and that nothing will change. And it's because those inside Holyrood rarely deliver what they promise. Today, John Swinney tells us yet again that he wants to eradicate child poverty, a bold and ambitious goal, but he's been making such promises for almost 2 decades. This was the Education Secretary who promised to close the poverty-related attainment gaps between the richest and the poorest pupils. He didn't keep that promise. The attainment gap is as wide as ever, and today he vows to eradicate child poverty. But this is also a promise he will not keep. Just as he didn't close the attainment gap, he will not eradicate child poverty. Yesterday, John Swinney talked of his government's budget being, I quote, a turning point. He's been in power for 18 years, but only now he's at a turning point. Is he turning away from all his past years of failure? Trying to turn away from the SNP's pitiful record on education, on opportunity, on the economy. 18 years of SNP rule has got Scotland into this state and driven people to lose faith in the Parliament's ability to get things done. Anas Sarwar isn't much better. He spoke yesterday of setting a new direction. His party already promised change, then broke their promises not to raise taxes. Raising national insurance is not a new direction. It's crippling businesses, many of which are struggling to survive. And when those businesses go under, people will lose their jobs. It's more of the same old approach that has failed Scotland for decades. Labour's supposedly new direction looks exactly the same as the past 18 years of SNP rule. Labour mostly nods along with everything the SNP does on social security, just as they backed Nicola Sturgeon's dangerous gender self-ID law and Hamza Yousaf's Hate Crime Act. They only really offer more of the same. Holyrood needs to do things differently. Instead of focusing on inputs, we need to focus on outcomes. Rather than throwing money at problems, we need to better spend what this Parliament takes from taxpayers. And we need to take less of it so people can decide what's best for themselves, their families and their communities. People in the real world want politicians to show some common sense for a change. Common sense in education by making our schools safe and giving pupils the space to thrive. Common sense on the economy so we can encourage business growth to create more jobs. Common sense on social security so the safety net is there while ensuring that work always pays. This is what my party represents, a different, bolder approach than the SNP and Labour. And we won't make promises we can't keep, unlike John Swinney. We won't offer change, then do more of the same, unlike Anas Sarwar. We'll tell it straight, keep our word, say what we mean and deliver on what we promise. We will proudly champion the values of mainstream Scotland: decency, aspiration, fairness and opportunity. We'll offer a Scottish Conservative way to reduce poverty, by reducing regulations and bureaucracy in business so they can create more jobs, by taking less in tax so people have more control over their own lives and the means to get ahead, by strengthening our education system with a strict focus on higher standards. That's the change that my party stands for, and it's the different way that Scotland so desperately needs. And I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Finlay. I now call on Paul O'Kane to speak to and to move Amendment 16003.3. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. And can I take this opportunity to wish you and colleagues across the Chamber a happy New Year. And I want to begin in that vein, as I always do in debates such as this, by stating again that tackling child poverty should be a priority across this Chamber and in all spheres of government. And we should take an approach to tackling child poverty that has consent. I'm, of course, being heckled now by the government front bench when I'm trying to speak about consensus, so it may help if the Cabinet Secretary listens to that point, because I think it's very important. I think it's the spirit in which the First Minister began his remarks this afternoon, so I do think that's very important, because, of course, it's a vitally important mission that I think many of us would agree on, and the expectation that all children, no matter their background, should have security, stability and opportunity as they're growing up. I think that's something many of us in this chamber aspire to and want to find that renewed constructive partnership to work towards. And indeed, I welcome and have done previously the continued new constructive relationship between UK, Scottish and local government on these issues. And I do think it's important that we put that on the record and that we call for that to continue. Now, we may be at the start of a new year, but of course this is not a new challenge or a new debate. I will give way just before I begin this point.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Kane for giving me, Presiding Officer, and I'm anxious to engage with them on the question of agreement across the parliamentary spectrum, because one of the points that I was making in my speech was that Parliament has agreed and legislated for child poverty targets, which we all believe to be important to achieve. And the point I would put to Mr O'Kane is whether he recognises and accepts that there is an obligation on all members of Parliament, whether they're in government or in opposition, to contribute constructively to assisting Parliament to achieve those objectives that Parliament has legislated for, almost considering these questions as not somehow the property of the government, but the property of us all as members of Parliament.
Paul O'Kane.
Well, I thank the First Minister for that intervention, and of course it is the responsibility of this Parliament to hold those targets in their hands, in a sense, because we agreed across this chamber, prior to my being here, that these should be put into law. So it is important that we all work to deliver them. I will say more on those targets and my concern about the government's leadership of that, because the government has the tools and the powers and the levers in order to drive much of that. So I will say something further on that, as I progress in my speech. If he allows me to make a little progress, I will allow him to come back in, because it's the very point I'm coming on to make is the length of time we have spent in this chamber looking at these issues. Indeed, the government have set their motion in the context of the budget. And for many months, the First Minister and his front bench, I think, have sought to project this budget as though it was their first budget, as though it was a new budget of a new government. But in 2025, we enter 18 years of this SNP government being in power. And indeed, the current First Minister started passing budgets when I had not long left secondary school. He has had those wide-ranging levers of power for almost 2 decades, as Finance Secretary, as Education Secretary and as Deputy First Minister prior to coming to the office he now holds. So we must consider, I think, Presiding Officer, that despite 3 First Ministers in my short time in this Parliament and 4 across almost 20 years in government, all stating that child poverty is the top priority, the most recent estimates show that there are 30,000 more children in poverty now compared to when the SNP came to power in 2007. And on that point the First Minister makes about those legally binding targets, there are alarm bells ringing about those targets where he has had the power to make changes. Indeed, the Poverty and Inequality Commission, in the report last year, said that progress has been slow or not evident at all. And it predicted that it is now improbable that these legally binding child poverty targets will be met. And I think we have to reflect on that, because, as I say, we are almost at the 20-year mark of the SNP having those levers that I spoke about. And we have to be honest that one budget is not going to provide the change of approach, the change of direction that's required to meet the scale of the challenge before us. And of course, I would want to, at this point in the debate, put on record our clear support and pride indeed in ending that era of austerity and ensuring that there is additional money coming to the Scottish Government from a UK Labour Government. The investment, I think, of £5 billion into the Scottish Government is vitally important and should be recognised today. And I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government didn't see fit to recognise that within its motion, because there has also been other welcome down payments on tackling child poverty at a UK level, which I'll come on to speak about after I've taken this intervention from the First Minister.
I'm very grateful to Mr O'Kane for giving way for a second time. I'd point out to him that we'll only have 20 years of an SNP government if we win the 2026 election, which I fully intend to do. So just to put that on the record to Mr O'Kane. But on a point of consensus, can I welcome the fact that we are in an improved position on the public finances as a consequence of UK government decisions? But doesn't Mr O'Kane also, if I accept that point, does Mr O'Kane not have to accept that the 14 years of austerity, which essentially reversed the very good work that was done by the previous Labour government in reducing child poverty, has actually contributed to making our challenge a great deal greater as a consequence of the madness of the austerity of the last 14 years?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, the first thing I would say to the First Minister is that it perhaps feels longer. It maybe feels like 30 years that the SNP have actually been in power. And perhaps I should have paid more attention to my maths classes I was attending when he was setting out his first budgets. But I would say on his substantive point about Tory austerity in those 14 years, those are years that I campaigned against ardently. I did not want the Conservative government to be elected. I did not want Russell Finley's support of Liz Truss and others over that 14-year period to be brought here today and lectured at as though it was some kind of triumph. But what is clear is the work to fix the foundations and to make a change has begun and will continue under this Labour government. And I was coming on to speak about the down payments that have been made to tackle these issues at that UK level, raising the minimum wage, introducing the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation, changing the debt repayment levels on benefits, for example, to ensure those that are struggling with debt keep more universal credit payments as part of that wider UK task force on child poverty and that strategy across government. So I do hope that all of those interventions are supported by the First Minister and the Government, and I'm disappointed, as I've said already, that there's no cognisance of them in the Government motion, and I'll give way to Stephen Kerr.
Briefly, Mr Kerr, please.
So does Paul O'Kane accept then that many economists, in fact the majority of economists, predict that because of the national insurance changes, the increases that have been brought about by Rachel Reeves, there will be increased business failure and there will be rising unemployment? How on earth does that help with any aspect of poverty, least of all child poverty?
And Mr Kane, please start to bring your remarks to close, please.
I will, Presiding Officer. Well, given that Mr Finlay clearly has some kind of idea that we should all be listening to on this side about how to reduce child poverty and to deal with the issues and invest in public services, perhaps Mr Kerr and colleagues might tell us how they would pay for public service and they would support the public service, because they didn't in their 14 years as they drove it into the ground. I am very conscious now, Presiding Officer, that I have taken a number of interventions and I will bring my remarks to their peroration. It is clear that we need to take more action, that we need to take action across our public services in order to reduce child poverty. It is clear that health, education, housing are all issues where this Scottish Government have, after that time in government, failed to make the substantive changes that are required to tackle the root causes of poverty. Because it is clear that we must take a rounded view of poverty in all of its facets. It cannot just be for the social security system to support people. It has to be about good work, it has to be about well-paid jobs, it has to be about support to get into work, it has to be an NHS that's there when you need it, it has to be about the family support that people require through social work and other council services. All of those issues are important, backed up by a strong social security system that is there when people need it. One budget is not going to make the difference, Deputy Presiding Officer, that's clear, and the opportunity to take a new direction on those issues has not been taken by this government, will not be taken by this government, and I think it is only a new government who can provide that in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kane. I now call on Patrick Harvey to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government motion describes child poverty as its single greatest priority and as a national mission, and all political parties agree that it should be such a mission. But it is completely legitimate to debate, as the amendments do, whether the government's actions match the rhetoric. But but every political party has a choice in how we take part in that debate. Do we really advance that debate purely by making party political points? We all do it. And there's nothing wrong with making party political points in a debate like this. But solely doing that, without offering positive, constructive ideas of our own, that doesn't advance the debate, move it forward, or achieve change in the real world. So whether in budget debates or at any other time, Greens have always sought to make a difference for people in the real world. And far too many others appear to have no interest in doing so. Some seem to have little interest in reality. The Conservative dismissal of pretty much everything the government is doing was bizarre enough, but their leader's suggestion that the one thing that was wrong with Liz Truss was that she wasn't in power longer seemed even more bizarre. And the failure to recognise the UK government's track record, the impact of tax giveaways to high earners, and a brutal approach to social security. As well as the familiar ideological debate that we've had before and we'll have again on growth. The record of even just this country's economy is that there have been periods of high economic growth while whole communities have been put on the economic scrap heap. Economic growth on its own, without sustained and serious state intervention to ensure redistribution, does not create a trickle-down economy. It creates a hoover-up economy, empowering the wealthiest to further exploit the work of those on lower incomes. Labour, on the other hand, seem determined in the early stages of their term in UK government to disappoint. I do give credit where it's due. I really want to welcome the action that had been promised on the living wage, on the minimum wage, especially if they follow through on the commitment to abolish the discriminatory age bans. That in itself will be a very significant step. So I give credit where it's due. But Labour don't seem willing to do the same. Anna Sarwar's comments yesterday, so dismissive of the Scottish Child Payment, saying that it's a pretence in Scotland that somehow welfare is the only route out of poverty, or that the Scottish Government pretends that one single payment has the answer. Neither I nor anti-poverty organisations, nor I think the Scottish Government have ever claimed that it was. But it is the single most effective intervention from either government in recent years. And if Labour was willing to learn from what's worked, they'd be copying that policy throughout the rest of the UK, not undermining it here. If the Labour UK government had that ambition, but they, for party political reasons, didn't want to copy what the SNP had done, they'd at least reverse the worst Tory decisions like the two-child limit, but they won't. And if Scottish Labour had that ambition, they'd use the budget process to negotiate for positive, constructive change. But they don't do that either. And they also refuse to back the progressive tax changes, which can very easily begin to redistribute wealth from the richest to the rest. I give way.
Colette Stevenson.
Okay, thank you for taking that intervention. And in terms of those policy decisions that have been made by Labour, and noting the fact that there's a handful of Labour MSPs in this chamber today in terms of what we are doing in terms of trying to eradicate child poverty, I'd like to think that maybe their colleagues are down at Westminster hoping to try and mitigate and remove the bedroom tax, the benefit cap and the brutal cut to the winter fuel payment, as well as the NI payments as well that have been increased.
Well, I'm sympathy for some of what the member says. I think it might be an intervention on a Labour member rather than on my speech. Look, I want to address the fact that the wider life circumstances people face are hugely important, whether that's health, education, skills and the inequalities there. And these are both causes and consequences of poverty. But putting more money into the pockets of people who need it is and always will be a vital part of the response to poverty and inequality. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about saying so. The political right are never embarrassed about demanding tax breaks for the wealthiest to put more money into those pockets. Progressives should never be embarrassed about the positive role that social security has to put money in the pockets of those who need it. And cutting costs too, cutting the costs that people face in their lives is another critical intervention, and progressive tax is needed to pay for both forms of action. The Scottish Government motion can be criticised for being a wee bit self-congratulatory at times, but frankly, every government does that. Every government does that. I might even have done it once or twice myself in the last few years. There's nothing surprising there. But Parliament and parties should be criticising by advancing positive ideas, and that's the Green track record. There is more progressive tax in this country. There is the Scottish Child Payment having been increased, but also free bus travel for young people, the scrapping of peak rail fares for at least as long as it lasted, abolishing school meal debt, cutting the cost of the school day, investing in energy efficiency and an emergency rent freeze. That's the positive track record of action, and the proposals that we have now, both to keep the critical elements of the housing bill so that we don't continue to impose above inflation rent increases, even in circumstances that justify the maximum action. Pressing ahead with the Heat and Buildings Bill, because if we get that right, it won't just cut emissions, it will cut people's energy bills too, cutting costs for households. But on the budget that we face in the weeks ahead, the Government knows that we're pressing as hard as we can for that £2 bus fare cap to cut people's costs of getting about in their daily lives, to accelerate the rollout of free school meals. And I wish to goodness that Labour colleagues were negotiating hard for those kind of positive changes or their own priorities in the budget process. They seem determined only to come up with yet another new way to achieve nothing out of the budget process.
Mr Harvey,
those are simple, affordable, straightforward areas where action could be taken right now to cut the cost of living, tackle child poverty and family poverty, and ensure better health and well-being for people who today struggle to meet those costs.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And I now call on Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Deputy Presiding Officer. It does break me when I see the symptoms of a child in poverty. Many of us will have seen that on a weekly basis when we do our door knocking or our advice surgeries. A cold, damp home. The clear signs of hunger, desperation. The fact they're deprived of the opportunities that others are afforded quite easily. Drugs, alcohol misuse, which disrupts families, causes enormous damage. And then the signs of poor health in the young people themselves that last for the rest of their lives. And that's why this is really important. This is not so much a political issue, it's an issue of human rights, of child rights. And there has been a consensus in this Parliament all the way back from the beginning. Wendy Alexander, back in 1999, set an ambition of defeating child poverty in a generation. And then the Scottish Government set the 2017 targets as legally binding targets of bringing it down to 10% by 2030. But I have to say it's a collective failure that over those 25 years, although there's been fluctuations, it's broadly the same as it was when we started this programme. Now, of course, it's been changed over time from a variety of different factors, from recession to the financial restrictions, through the pandemic to the energy crisis. There's a whole load of reasons that we can point to that are influencing it, under a variety of different political persuasions of those in government, whether here or at Westminster, whether it's the Liberal Democrats and Labour from that time or the Conservatives, Lib Dems and the SNP. There has been fluctuations, but collectively I think we have all got a responsibility to accept we haven't really nudged the dial that much, which is why when the targets are breathing down our necks, it's supposed to be the interim target is now, and we've got to get it down to 18%. We're nowhere near that. Now, of course, with the child payment, it's made some progress. But by 2030, we're supposed to bring it down to 10%. And it's around about the mid-20s just now. We've got a huge way to go. And my fear is that we aren't really focusing on long-term solutions that's going to last. Now, I'm supportive of the child payment. Don't get me wrong about this. I think it's important that we see a direct impact today in children when we go round in our constituencies. I don't want them to wait a day longer. in poverty. But if it's going to last, and it isn't just a sticking plaster, we've got to deal with the root causes. And to be fair, the First Minister set that out in his contribution, a much wider range of issues that we need to address that I'll come to in a second. But my fear is that sometimes in this Parliament, we celebrate the child payment as if it's the end of the process. And I know that's not what the First Minister believes, but I'm afraid too many just talk about the game-changing child payment and then don't go on to the rest of it. This should be the bridge to the further changes that we require to make sure we're not back here in another 10 years or 20 years, that we are actually able to deal with the root causes. So this is... yes, certainly.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Rennie for giving me, because I agree entirely with the point that he's made, that the Scottish Child Payment contributes, but it is not the whole story. The whole story has to be about the alignment of government policy to support those objectives, which is why one of the other priorities in the government's budget has been to put in place a real terms increase in the local government core grant to enable local authorities to strengthen the services upon which many of the individuals that Mr Rennie refers to would depend to help them on their journey out of poverty, in addition to the other measures that I mentioned in the speech. I give them that reassurance that that point is accepted at the heart of the government's approach to the child poverty strategy.
Willie Rennie.
I'm grateful for the First Minister for that. I am going to go on to talk about some of those issues because I think it's important to air them. Because my concern, I mean, the government seem to think they've made progress on the poverty-related attainment gap. I look at the figures, it's broadly flatlined. There's some improvement in primary, secondary, it's broadly the same as before. It's nowhere near closing the gap by 2026. Nowhere near it. And we've got to accept that. And I know the government will argue that it was substantially closed rather than completely closed. But we're not anywhere near the ambition that was set out by Nicola Sturgeon before. She set a very clear ambition to close the poverty-related attainment gap. So I think we need to accept when the education was at the centrepiece of the government agenda before, it has slipped and it needs a refocus. Take 2-year-olds for nursery education, something I used to plague the former First Minister Alex Salmond about repeatedly, almost on a weekly basis. The take-up of that is minuscule. And we know there's variations between one local authority and the other, but we're nowhere near getting it up to the levels that they've got to in England. Now, why is that? Now, I believe that education is in large a route out of poverty, particularly for 2-year-olds, before the habits can be formed, when we can give them a good education to lift themselves up for the future. I think we need to make sure that's up. I'm running out of time. So, health, mental health, physical health, stop people getting back to work. The level of economic inactivity in Scotland is way too high, much higher than it is in England. Why is that? Why have we got that gap, and what are we going to do to close it? Making more homes, building more homes. And I have to say the previous government policy, and I think there's an indication that is now changing it, actually contributed to the emergency housing situation that we have now. And I'm pleased to say that we are actually seeing some signs of change in that, so we can get more warm homes for those children to make sure they're living in better conditions. My final point is my intervention. There are a lot more ideas that I have and my party has to include in the budget to deal with many of these fundamental issues. The foundations of the economy, of the health service, of the education service are the roots out of poverty. That's the way longer term for future generations that we need to deal with this. And I'm pleased that the First Minister's door is open so we can have those discussions.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We will now move on to the open debate. I would advise, just for members' information, that backbench speeches are up to 6 minutes, except for SNP backbenchers who will be able to speak up to 4 minutes. I would advise members that there is no time in hand. And with that, I would advise the First Minister, that of course was with the agreement of the party's business manager and the presiding officer, a point of clarification, which I'm sure will be of interest to all members in the Chamber. And with that, I call Marie McNair to be followed by Miles Briggs. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I take this opportunity to wish yourself and everyone here at the Parliament a very healthy and happy New Year. I speak in support of measures in the draft budget to tackle child poverty and inequality. Eradicating child poverty is not just the morally right thing to do. In the years that follow, it will be paid back in increased wealth generation from a greater number of skilled and creative young workers. It will be paid back in savings across public services, from health to policing, because there are long-term costs to public services associated with child poverty. Children in poverty are more likely to have poorer health outcomes, and children in the lowest income households are 4 times more likely to experience mental health issues. Therefore, it's right that we step up to the challenge of eradicating child poverty. Despite restricted powers, the Scottish Government have kept thousands of children out of poverty by taking considered and significant action. Yet we recognise rates remain too high and that there is a real child and family behind every number. Therefore, the Scottish Government has set out a budget with clear action to tackle child poverty and inequality. In education, this budget will provide £120 million to head teachers to support initiatives designed to address the poverty-related attainment gap. The Scottish Government will also work with COSLA to expand 3 school meals to primary 6 and 7 children from low-income families. The budget will also invest significantly in social security benefits in 2025-26, putting money directly into people's pockets and ensuring benefits rise by inflation. And as the First Minister put it, some argue that investment in social security is the wrong choice for us to make, but we know that inequality is bad for our health, bad for our communities and bad for our economy. And this contrasts with Labour and Tory politicians who apparently believe that this vital support is handouts. This stigmatising language has no place in this Parliament or part of a modern and compassionate social security system. Scrapping the 2-child cap, increasing investment in the affordability housing supply programme, investment in breakfast clubs and the expansion of free school meals will all help tackle child poverty. These policies are good for everyone, and the Scottish Government's decision to scrap the 2-child cap, an inhumane and cruel policy, has been welcomed by many, including the Fraser of Allender Institute and the Poverty Alliance. The Child Poverty Action Group estimate that abolishing the 2-child limit could lift 15,000 children out of poverty. The opposition lack credibility criticising the levels of child poverty, but support keeping the policies in place that are the biggest drivers. To continue with these policies make children the victim of austerity, and in their book Social Murder, David Walsh and Jerry McCartney of the University of Strathclyde show the astonishing impact UK Government austerity has had on the life expectancy and mortality rates. They say this about Labour and the 2-child limit. Worryingly, the party has publicly stated that they will not reverse the 2-child benefit cap, a policy seen in many as being emblematic of austerity. Presiding Officer, it's clear Labour are letting the people of Scotland down. Here they have no influence. Labour HQ are not listening one bit to the Labour colleagues opposite. Not in the 2-child policy, not in universal credit, not in the winter fuel payment, and certainly not in Waspie Women. The spectacle of Anna Sarwar's disingenuous, belated call on the Scottish Government to mitigate his own party's 2-child policy illustrates that so well. Or maybe their plan to abstain on the budget shows that they are struggling to articulate a vision for Scotland. This draft budget is a chance for them to take a new direction, and I urge them to get behind it. Being in poverty makes everything more difficult, everything good less likely. This budget looks forward to the future with hope.
I'm going to have to call the next speaker. The next speaker is Miles Briggs. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Paul O'Kane started by saying he felt that he'd been listened to the First Minister since he was in secondary school. For me, that's primary school, to be quite frank. But can I take this opportunity to wish the Chamber a happy New Year. And can I also start by thanking the organisations which have provided useful briefings ahead of today's debate as well. And in the time I have today, I wanted to highlight 3 areas where I believe opportunities to tackle child poverty are being missed, and hope to bring some positive solutions to the Chamber this afternoon. And the first is in relation to child literacy levels, because 1 in 4 Scottish pupils are still not achieving literacy levels expected at their age. Now, with the post-pandemic levels of literacy still being a major concern, it's clear that we need to see a change of approach. And that's not taking into account the record levels of absenteeism we are seeing in Scottish schools. Now, although we have seen marginal improvements in trends, it is concerning that PISA data analysis does suggest declining education performance, especially in maths and in sciences. So what can we do to address child literacy rates? And I believe, and have spoken to the Cabinet Secretary for Education about this, that we need to see a renewed focus on reading within Curriculum for Excellence. 1 in 10 children in our country do not have access to books at home. That has to change, and that's why I've been impressed with the Little Free Library movement, which has been building in recent years, and the free children's libraries which have started popping up outside schools here in Edinburgh, such as the one outside Craiglockett Primary School. Now, that has the opportunity to provide young people, regardless of background, with access to free books. It's something I hope we can work with ministers on to get engagement, to see how this can be taken forward and developed across the country to provide for these free books across and outside every single primary school. As other MSPs have mentioned already in this debate today, there remains still an issue with regard to the free school meals policy. Bernardo state in their briefing for this debate that they have not had clarification on the delivery of the introduction of universal free school meals, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary, in closing, will outline to Parliament when this will be delivered, and if this policy is going to be delivered by the end of this session. Deputy Presiding Officer, I've consistently raised the issue of children stuck in temporary accommodation and the homelessness crisis here in the capital. Over Christmas recess, those of us who represent Edinburgh will know just how live that issue and challenging that issue remains. If ending child poverty is genuinely a cross-government priority, then housing needs to be placed at the heart of this. The number of children living in temporary accommodation has reached over 16,000. Now, the First Minister listed a number of housing policies in his speech, and I welcome those. But I think one area we need to look towards is a presumption against placing families with children in temporary accommodation. Many temporary accommodation facilities are inappropriate. And so I hope this is something ministers, and the Housing Minister I've raised this with previously, will look towards amendments around this with COSLA, because it is clear that for many children, when they are placed in temporary accommodation, that can become the end of the journey to a safe home. We need to make sure that changes, and that is an amendment I hope the Government will look towards bringing in the housing bill. The final issue I wanted to raise with ministers is with relation to access to healthcare. The First Minister didn't mention it in his speech, but Willie Rennie touched upon this, and I think it is really important. Because it is not always the main issue which springs to mind when we are talking and debating child poverty. But post-pandemic, access to healthcare for children is something which is becoming more and more concerning, similar to the poor outcomes for adults we are seeing. But the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health published their report Worried and Waiting last March, which was a review of paediatric waiting times in Scotland over the course of last year. It demonstrated some deeply concerning increases in waiting times for children accessing care. The percentage of children in Scotland waiting over 12 weeks for medical care increased by 49.8%, and the total number of paediatric waits sits currently at 10,512, which is a 114% increase. The time children are waiting to access health care needs to be given a review. It needs to be reviewed, and we need to see the Health Secretary, I believe, come to Parliament to make a statement specifically in relation to this issue. The Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health have put forward a number of key suggestions and recommendations, which I think can be taken forward by Government, and I hope and ask that ministers do review this current waiting times scandal. To conclude, there is cross-party consensus, I believe, still to work towards eradicating child poverty in Scotland today. As Russell Finlay stated, though, SNP ministers over the last 18 years have been good at creating processes. Our education system, our housing sector and our health services are full of them. What ministers haven't been good is actually delivering on outcomes. We need to see this Parliament focus on those outcomes. The Scottish Government is not making the progress it promised, and indeed the situation we are seeing for young people in education, in health and housing is often, for the most vulnerable children in our society, getting worse. And I support the amendment in my colleague Russell Finlay's name. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Kevin Stewart to be followed by Carol Mochan. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and Happy New Year to you and to the Chamber. This budget is redistributive, unashamedly so. And this budget delivers reduced taxation for more than half of Scots, with lower-earning taxpayers paying 2% less of their income in tax than folks south of the border. By reducing the burden of taxation on the many, this budget is putting more money in the pockets of ordinary Scots so that they can support themselves, their families and especially their children. But progressive taxation is not enough. And this budget also delivers progressive spending. The Scottish Child Payment is a key policy supported by this budget. This payment has been a game-changer in reducing child poverty, and its continued support will provide much-needed financial assistance to families. But the Scottish Child Payment isn't enough by itself. One of the biggest drivers of child poverty in the UK is the UK Government's two-child cap. Ending this despicable UK policy in Scotland is a major part of this budget, and its removal could lift over 15,000 children out of poverty. By taking this first step, we are sending a clear message that every child in Scotland deserves a fair start in life. The Government are also prioritising early learning and childcare, with almost £1 billion invested to ensure that all staff in the sector are paid at least the real living wage. This investment will support the provision of 1,140 hours of affordable, high-quality early learning and childcare services to all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. And this will give our children the best possible start in life, while allowing parents to re-enter the workforce and build their careers and improve their children's lives. But it doesn't end there. This Government is also investing in the future of our nation by investing in the education of our children. The budget will deliver a 3% uplift for spending on education and skills to maintain teacher levels and invest in school infrastructure. And this includes £120 million for head teachers to support initiatives designed to address the poverty-related attainment gap, because we know that education is one of the keys to breaking the cycle of poverty. The budget also includes plans to expand free school meals to primary 6 and 7 children from low-income families, ensuring that all children have access to nutritious meals. And what's more, there's also funding for new Bright Start breakfast programme, which will deliver more breakfast clubs in primary school. And I know from my past in local government, where we introduced breakfast clubs in Aberdeen at an early stage, the difference that this makes in terms of a child's ability to learn, because hungry children find it difficult to learn in classrooms. So this will help ensure that no child starts the day hungry. But it's not just education. Housing is another critical area addressed in this budget, and I'm glad to see that £768 million there to boost Scotland's affordable housing programme. Can I say, Presiding Officer, that given the news in this budget and what I have outlined today, which helps tackle child poverty, I'm calling on everyone in this chamber to put party politics aside and to support this budget.
Thank you. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by George Adam. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by saying it is my view, my party's view, that the overarching priority of this Scottish Parliament should be to tackle, reduce and eradicate child poverty. Child poverty is a huge challenge facing our country, limiting the opportunities of children in every town and deepening the inequalities that already exist in our society from the second a child is born. It should shame us all that it remains as prevalent as it does in our country today. We stand in this chamber week in, week out, discussing the modern, inclusive and progressive Scotland we think exists, when in reality it is shocking that, according to some of the most recent estimates, hundreds of thousands of children in Scotland grow up in poverty. The End Child Poverty Coalition briefing indicates that in the period of 2020 to 2023, 1 in 4 children in Scotland were growing up in poverty. Now, I have made it clear before, and I make it clear once again, that I deplore the previous Tory government's attack on working class people. They are the friends of the rich and show no interest in redistributing wealth to those most in need. I believe that the approach taken by Tory governments is to benefit those with the most wealth and power. And in response to Russell Finlay's points, they do not seek to change inequality and in fact embed it within our society to ensure change never comes to those most in need. After 14 years in government, the Tories must accept their part in the poverty felt by our constituents today. And can I say that I fully agree with the First Minister and his point on austerity. It has decimated the communities that I represent. But of course, as I also talk about often in this chamber, we must be honest about this place, about our responsibility here in Scotland. John Swinney and First Ministers before him all promised to eradicate child poverty, and yet those promises broken over 17 years of an SNP government and SNP budgets. And the reality, as we've heard for young people of Scotland and their families today, is that the government are set to fail yet again to meet their own targets on child poverty. And yet here they are, I think it's fair to say, arrogant in the way they approach this debate in the chamber today. It is my view that they do not seek to genuinely debate what can be done here in Scotland. Rather, they take to grandstanding to ensure division does continue. The Scottish Government know that I and my Scottish Labour colleagues are working with and seeking to influence the UK Government, and yet rather than seeking to work with us and look to work together on devolved issues, the SNP look to divide. It's my view we can work together if we take women's health, women's reproductive health. There has been a good collaboration approach between members in this chamber, all of us seeking to ensure women are safe to access health care. We are all included in discussions with the current Women's Health Champion, and I'm glad to be able to put on the record thank you to Minister Jenny Minto on this. We need to do more of this and ensure that members and government can have genuine debate about how devolved governments can work to benefit our constituents. Early in this session, the Health Committee held an inquiry into health inequalities and sought to seek some honest answers into the situation for people living in our most deprived communities. We did this cross-party, and I believe it is still essential we recognise this as one of the most significant political issues we should address in the Parliament to date. In a debate on child poverty, it is important to speak to the scale of the problem we face in health inequalities. Children who grow up in our poorest communities today, if we do not change that trajectory, will see only increased disadvantage. To remind members, in Scotland it is women from more affluent areas are more likely to attend screening appointments. Women in our most deprived areas significantly lower attendance rates. Suicide rates are higher in our most deprived areas than they are in our more affluent, as are cancer rates. And the gap in life expectancy between the most and least deprived areas has widened. This is shocking and should worry us all. This is areas of devolved responsibility, and we must spend more time in the chamber addressing these issues. In doing some research for this debate, I came across this quote from Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The pattern of inequality in life expectancy between different places are not a matter of chance or fate, but a reflection of the stuff of life itself. To my mind, we are elected to ensure that society is fairer and that barriers to inequality are broken down. That we can't represent a picture of a country where politicians are letting people down, a country where the poorest pay the price of neglectful government. In closing, Presiding Officer, we all speak in this chamber about root causes of poverty, and nowhere is it more acutely felt than in life expectancy and health inequalities. This is why the government must be more honest about its poor performance in early learning and childcare and its actual outcomes on provision of free school meals and affordable housing budgets, and of course, its poor record on local government funding. Real change can only come if some honesty is allowed to be part of the discussion. I would remind the Parliament poverty and inequality is everyone's business, so I ask all members to reflect on working together on all the elements that can be used to change the direction of child poverty in Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call George Adam to follow by Sanders Gulhani. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, here we are, the first debate of a new year, and it's been interesting, but clearly not interesting for the Labour Party, as only 4 of them apparently appear to be in the chamber here at this moment, which is quite telling when you consider how important this is to people in our constituencies. But, Presiding Officer, one of my New Year's resolutions was to be nicer to everyone, and I'm hoping to try and get through this speech with keeping that resolution. Unfortunately, I've got no chance as one of my colleagues, but Russell Finlay, when he was talking during his part of the day, 8 minutes, Presiding Officer, he spoke for 8 minutes of his 10, where he said how doomed we were, how bad everything was, and never gave us one idea of what the Conservatives would do. Devoid of ideas, devoid of any plan to make any difference to people's lives in our constituencies. And that shows you where the Conservatives are, because they are appealing for this populist, Farage-esque kind of Musk-type ideal of trying this populist vote. But I don't believe that populist vote's here in Scotland. The people of Scotland want a plan. They want to see that we're actually going to do something for it with the government, and they want a government that supports it, not something that's going to leave them to the beck and call of the free market economy that would just create the kind of Thatcherism and Reaganomics on stilts, effectively. But whilst the Labour Party, they're all over the place when it comes to the issue of child poverty, and they seem to have no idea of where they're going forward and how they're going to deal with it. I may be unhelpful, I may have drifted off during the opening debate, but the two-child cap, I don't believe it was mentioned in any shape or form, and I think that's an important issue that we need to deal with as we move forward with this debate. But out there, Presiding Officer, the people of Scotland want a plan. They want to know what we are doing, and this Scottish Government, with its budget, does offer that. It offers that plan that we can deal with the here and now and build for the future. And that's what they're looking for. Not just the usual nonsense from the unionist parties, but the opportunity to actually debate this in more detail. This debate gives us an opportunity to address an issue that cuts to the heart of our nation's values. Child poverty. Tackling poverty in Scotland, as many of you know, is a passion of my own, not just because of my own background and where I was brought up, although that is important to a lot of people out there in the real world, for them as well, who are still living in these communities, but because I want to see further progress being made in our communities. And there is no silver bullet solution for this. There's no big idea. It will always be a collective of ideas and plans, a basket of measures in order for us to deal with it. But in order to do that, Presiding Officer, you have to have the commitment and the belief that you're going to do it and do something about it. The Scottish Government's budget for 25-26 is not just a financial plan, but it shows the Scottish Government's values. The SNP and our First Minister's unwavering commitment to eradicating child poverty, ensuring that every child in Scotland has the best start in life. We know that inequality damages our health, our communities and our economy. But that is why this SNP Government is delivering hope for the future and practical solutions for the present. The Scottish Government's initiatives such as expansion of free school meals, the affordable housing supply programme and the groundbreaking Scottish Child Payment, designed to tackle poverty at its very roots. Presiding Officer, let me end by saying that tackling child poverty is not just a policy choice, it's a moral imperative. The Scottish Government budget represents hope, resilience and a brighter future for every child in Scotland. And it is time for the Labour UK Government to match our ambition, and if they will not, they must step aside. Let us get on with the work here in Scotland and create the future that our children deserve.
Thank you. I now call Sanders Gulhani to be followed by Claire Hockey. Up to 6 minutes. Dr Gulhani.
Thank you. Tackling child poverty should be a moral imperative for any government. But it's not about having good intentions. It's about real, lasting change. Sadly, the measures proposed by the SNP, while well-meaning, fall short of delivering the transformative solutions our most deprived communities desperately need. Poverty isn't just about money. It's actually about deprivation, which is a deeper, more insidious issue that shapes a child's future. Deprivation means living without basic opportunities, facing barriers to quality healthcare, housing and education. Deprived communities, deprivation locks families into cycles of disadvantage that financial handouts alone cannot break. The SNP claims eradicating child poverty is its single greatest priority. But is it really? Their true priority, time and time again, has been independence. They assert that independence is the magic wand for a better Scotland. But let's be honest, the economics simply don't add up. Independence would pile financial strain on families already struggling. The promise of independence as a cure-all is not just misleading, it's a dangerous distraction from child poverty rates here in Scotland, which remain stubbornly high under the SNP watch. And since the SNP took power in 2007, almost a quarter of our children still live in poverty, an estimated 240,000 every year between 2020 and 2023. And while social security measures are valuable, they're constrained by funding and administrative inefficiencies. Child poverty is not, as the SNP would have you think, simply the income of the family, but it is so much more. The uncomfortable truth is that social security policies don't tackle the root cause: deprivation, wage stagnation, unemployment, poor housing and health inequalities. Let me bring this closer to home. Drumchapel in Glasgow is a community where I've long advocated for a better healthcare investment. The Drumchapel Health Centre serves a population facing significant deprivation. We need to see basic infrastructure put in. The population faces significant deprivation, poor housing, low incomes and high rates of chronic illness. Being a GP, I see the difference primary care can have on local communities, and yes, I will.
Alistair Allen, briefly.
I wonder if the member, as he is outlining some of the root causes of poverty and deprivation, do what his colleague failed to do, and that is answer the question, which is whether he feels that many years of Conservative government and austerity have anything whatsoever to do with this poverty.
Incredible. 18 years in power, 18 years of being able to do something, and yet Scotland is worse than anywhere else in the UK. Why is that? Why is that? It's because of the policies of the SNP government. And it's also how inept the SNP government is. The inverse care law hits the hardest in places like Drumchapel, the principle that those who need healthcare the most receive the least. And here in Drumchapel, overstretched services and administrative barriers mean families struggle to access even basic care, and £25 a week won't fix the crumbling infrastructure. Deprivation, again, is not just about money, it's about missed opportunities. In the places like Drumchapel, children grow up facing higher rates of preventable disease, mental health challenges and educational underachievement, all because of where they were born. And financial support can ease immediate pressures, but it doesn't build the foundation for a better future. Take housing as an example. Substandard homes don't just hurt children's physical harm, they harm their education and mental well-being. Housing is entirely devolved to the Scottish Government. Why then is it not a central focus in child poverty strategies? Why are almost 16,000 children living in temporary accommodation, as we heard from Miles Briggs? We need to address the intergenerational impact of deprivation. A child growing up in poverty is more likely to face poor health, underachievement and lower lifetime earnings. And this is a cycle we cannot afford to perpetuate. The SNP's approach feels like throwing money at symptoms while ignoring the disease. Child poverty cannot be eradicated through simple cash payments alone. True change demands addressing the systemic issues that hold families back. The left here in Holyrood think they're progressive. In fact, listening to Patrick Harvey, he thinks he is progressive. He is not. Patrick Harvey is regressive, attacking small and medium businesses, opposing anyone who makes money, oppressive tax to anyone earning over £28,000, squandering money when in government. This is how you make everybody poor. The left-wing consensus here in Holyrood believe in only creating a bigger state, a greater social security budget, not great quality education that allows people to truly escape poverty, not just for them, but for the generations to come after them. And university is not the be-all and end-all. Colleges, learning a trade and apprenticeships allow for great lifelong jobs that pay very well. In conclusion, we need to deliver lasting solutions to ensure every child in Scotland, regardless of their postcode, has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Claire Haughey to be followed by Bob Doris. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Haughey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In his speech both yesterday and today, the First Minister could not be clearer. There are too many children in Scotland living in poverty, and the continuing effects of Westminster austerity, UK inflation, the pandemic and the economic fallout from Brexit means that too many families are facing acute challenges. Since 2010, UK government welfare reform has been characterised by cuts, and any concept of a UK safety net has been systematically unravelled, and it's threadbare. In South Lanarkshire, where my Rutherglen constituency is situated, the Community Planning Partnership have noted sharp increases in cost of living costs, meaning that more families sought help from their money advice service last year, more sought food bank referrals and more faced homelessness. Experiencing poverty in childhood is not just about families' immediate financial security, but about longer-term damage. And it brings a loss of human potential and an increase in demand for public services. Taking action to tackle poverty is not a zero-sum game. It's about Scotland's collective prosperity and well-being. And the Scottish Government's budget is unwavering in its resolve to tackle child poverty head-on. It drives forward investment in a range of activities to support three key drivers of poverty reduction: increasing income from social security and benefits in kind, increasing income from employment and reducing the cost of living. Now, to take just one of those measures as an example, the Scottish Child Payment puts money directly in the pockets of family. And beyond the statistics about how the payment is lifting children out of poverty, we can see that it is making a real difference in people's day-to-day lives. I would urge members to look at the Changing Realities project and read Lisa's story about the real difference the payment has made for her and her young son, allowing them to live with more dignity and self-respect. Presiding Officer, yesterday Anas Sarwar got very cagey when pressed on previous ambitions for the Scottish Child Payment and made vague noises about, and I quote, new directions. It sounds eerily familiar from Labour. Promise change. Without disclosing, it will be changed for the worse. Yeah. Labour need to put their money where their mouth is and back a budget, not abstaining to put money in the pockets of families directly there and fund wider services that support them. Actions which we agree in Parliament are, of course, only part of the story. Now, South Lanarkshire Council was previously praised for its work in sharing best practice and work towards reducing the cost of the school day. On a recent visit to St Bride's Primary in Cambuslang, I saw how hard staff were working to make sure that every child was included in every activity in their busy festive calendar, with practical, sensitive support being provided where required. However, the Labour administration of South Lanarkshire Council have made some extremely short-sighted decisions, imposing huge rises on grassroots sports, pricing out families and children's participation, cutting and closing library services despite being warned about digital exclusion and early literacy, and slashing school bus services, directly hitting families in the pockets. When constituents have come to see me about these issues, they are angry, very angry, about the direct impact on their pockets that was not fully explored or understood by the Council. Yesterday, the First Minister called on all parties in this chamber to come together and support the Scottish budget and agree to take further steps in eradicating poverty. But decisions taken in council chambers across Scotland, for better or worse, will directly impact the families' pockets and the trajectory of children's lives. And we should all be putting the case in all spheres of government to tackle child poverty.
Thank you. I now call Bob Doris to be followed by Pam Glancy. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thought an appropriate contribution to make in this afternoon's debate regarding tackling child poverty within Scotland's budget was to bring to the Parliament, as I have done before, the real-life lived experience of the direct and detrimental impact of the UK Government's two-child benefit cap, which our SNP Government's budget before us in just a few weeks' time will take action to finally begin to end. That will transform the real life experience of many young people and lift 15,000 of them out of poverty. The difference on this occasion, though, is that I no longer speak of the Conservatives' two-child cap, but now rather, unfortunately, the Labour Party's two-child cap. In bringing that lived experience to Parliament this afternoon, I once again thank Glasgow North West Glasgow Citizens Advice Bureau, who have captured that lived experience and advocated so strongly for so many of my constituents that I am privileged to represent right across Maryhill and Springburn. For instance, Glasgow North West CAB supported a woman who, when she separated from her husband, found herself and her children reliant on universal credit. Imagine discovering, when you need support the most at the breakdown of your marriage, that the UK Government takes the view that only 2 of your 4 children will be supported financially. To put it bluntly, the family will deliberately not be given enough money to live on. Or a father who they supported, who had to give up work and a well-paid job in the most tragic of circumstances. Dad had to somehow support 4 children aged between 3 and 12 years old when Mum sadly died. As a father, I can only imagine having to support children in such circumstances, such tragic and distressing circumstances. Finding himself in financial difficulty, Dad was supported to make a claim for universal credit. Imagine a UK Government that essentially tells a grieving dad that they will not offer adequate support for 2 of his children. Don't their children count? Don't they have needs? Don't they have rights? A UK welfare system that financially penalises a child when they lose their mum is simply repugnant. Likewise, a UK system that will not support children that need support following a marital breakdown is surely inhumane. Either way, it is now a UK Labour system simply not fit for purpose. And most disturbingly of all, it is not fit for purpose by design, not by accident. I am aware there is a struggle within the Labour group as to whether to support SNP plans to mitigate UK Labour's immoral two-child cap. Several people within the Labour benches will agree with me, I know they will. Better Labour in Scotland stood up to a UK Labour government rather than angsting over whether to do the right thing and support the SNP here at Holyrood. In the time that I have left, let me talk about a couple of other matters within the budget. On free school meals, I'm proud of the SNP position on free school meals. I was part of the campaign before I was elected to this place to change SNP policy to bring in universal free school meals. I wish we'd gone quicker, I wish we could have done, and I wish we'd go further. Personally, as First Minister, I am looking forward to a re-elected Scottish Government in 2026. I see universal free school meals sitting in secondary schools also. And also in relation to breakfast clubs, not just to alleviate child poverty, I want a breakfast club culture for the additional benefits it gives young people in schools across Scotland. I know my time is up, Presiding Officer, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr Doris. I now call Pam Duncan-Glancy to be followed by Colette Stevenson. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to wish you and everyone in the Chamber and watching today a happy New Year. I'm pleased to speak in today's debate on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party. Child poverty must be a national mission, not just for this Scottish Government, but for all governments at all levels, because it holds people back, it makes people ill and it stifles opportunity. But as we start 2025, 30,000 more children are living in poverty than were when the SNP came to power in 2007. All across Scotland, children are paying the price of 14 years of Tory failure and 17 years of SNP failure. Earlier this year, the Poverty and Inequality Commission published a report which laid bare that SNP progress on tackling child poverty has been slow or not evident at all. Despite the rhetoric and I believe this is true, the good intentions, This government has failed to lift children out of poverty. They've failed to deliver on key promises on child poverty, and despite the largest settlement for the Scottish Government in the history of devolution, they've failed to use the opportunity to deliver a budget that truly delivers better outcomes for the people of Scotland. They've slashed the affordable housing budget and the fuel insecurity fund. They could have committed to new employability programmes, giving families support they need to boost their incomes. And they say they'll end the two-child cap, but the funding budgeted for it is insufficient to deliver what they say they will. And to truly lift people out of poverty, the government would need to take transformative action across all public services, housing, mental health care, employability and education to reduce child poverty. But this budget doesn't do this. It does not offer the new direction needed. And nowhere is that clearer than in education. I've said it before in this chamber and elsewhere, and I'll say it again. Education is a great leveller. It is, as Mandela said, the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And that includes your own world. Child poverty impacts education. We see it in the yawning attainment gap. But education can impact child poverty too. Supporting schools, colleges and universities, those who learn there and the staff who work in them, in turn supports opportunities for children and young people, and in so doing helps tackle child poverty at its roots, spreading opportunity for all. But today, far too many in Scotland are missing out. There is an opportunity gap. Education can be the great leveller and open opportunity, but it can't do that with staff overworked and burning out, the fear of teaching as a precarious job, or with 40% of pupils who have ASN not having their needs met. And I fail to see how less than £1 million additional funding per local authority can change outcomes on that. Presiding Officer, time and time again, the most disadvantaged children and young people bear the biggest burden. The attainment gap at higher level is now the largest it's ever been, contributing to an ever-widening opportunity gap in later life. Teachers are key to all of this. They don't just educate, they care, they support and they nurture. They help young people flourish regardless of background, and they give them the tools to stay out of poverty by equipping them to harness the opportunities Scotland has to offer. But instead of the promised increase in teacher numbers, this government's overseen a reduction, and now they don't say they'll increase them at all, only maintain them. And with a workforce on its knees and no workforce plan, it's not even clear how they'll do that. And I'm happy to take the intervention from the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary, briefly.
Well, I thank the member for taking the intervention. Of course, she will recognise the draft budget proposes an additional funding settlement for local authorities to help increase teacher numbers. Why are the Labour Party abstaining on that increase to improve the number of teachers in Scotland's schools?
Pam Gosal.
And I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her seat for this contribution. And the Cabinet Secretary knows fine well that that's not how the budget process works, and that it's not about picking and choosing individual parts on the budget. And the Cabinet Secretary is hiding behind the fact that her government said they'd increase teacher numbers, but they've reduced them, and now they're only going to maintain them. And on school meals, the government once said it'd roll out universal provision for all primary children, but now that's stopping at primary 5. The First Minister said he'd written off free school meals debt, but on the 7th of November, the Cabinet Secretary for Education admitted in an answer to me that no funding to local authorities through the School Meal Debt Fund had been issued at that time. Presiding Officer, it's not just schools that matter either. Colleges are crucial too. That's why it begs belief that the budget delivers colleges a real terms cut. Colleges support people who are furthest behind. They provide accessible education and skills development, create pathways to employment and boost incomes in the most disadvantaged communities. They equip students with the skills they need, and they support people into well-paid jobs, key, of course, to reducing child poverty. Colleges have told the Education Committee that in the absence of sustainable funding for colleges, the range of opportunities for the poorest learners will be further reduced, and these communities will be further left behind. Presiding Officer, we're seeing the impact of that in the retention rates from people from the poorest backgrounds dropping, the retention rates dropping for the most deprived people at university colleges too. Lastly, Presiding Officer, we know that childcare is crucial to lifting families out of poverty and so children out of poverty, yet the higher education discretionary funding and childcare allowance has been cut. None of this, Presiding Officer, is inevitable. We can and we must change direction and close the opportunity gap for young people in Scotland. We can't allow our focus, ambition and action to narrow to one-off solutions or, worse still, promises never delivered. Children deserve better than that. That's why we on these benches know that we must, and a UK Labour government is acting to tackle child poverty at its roots, with a new deal for working people, a pay rise for more than 200,000 Scots, and help to drive down energy bills. Child poverty must be a national mission for the Scottish Government and, more widely, across Parliament. On that we agree, not because of targets, but because young people in Scotland deserve to thrive and live up to their potential. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call the final speaker in the open debate, Colette Stevenson, up to 4 minutes. Ms Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the fact that our first debate of 2025 is on tackling child poverty and inequality, the key priority of the Scottish Government. The SNP Government's draft budget marks a turning point. It offers delivery in the present and hope for the future, as well as record investment in vital public services like the National Health Service and local government. This budget will support the Government's aims to eradicate child poverty, grow the economy and tackle the climate emergency. Of course, Scotland has faced a challenging few years with the pandemic, alongside a triple whammy of Westminster-created harms: austerity, Brexit and the cost of living crisis. And for many households, challenges remain. Living standards are not good enough for far too many people, and rising energy costs continue to put pressure on people. However, Scotland's economy has shown resilience, and people in Scotland recognise the SNP's commitment to a strong social contract. This budget will deliver on sharing the wealth of our nation more fairly and ensuring economic growth benefits everyone in our country. The SNP's Scottish Government's draft budget will, if passed, ensure that we see continued investment in policies to continue tackling child poverty, including 1140 hours of early learning and childcare, concessionary travel for under 22s, employability services and social security. Of course, the game-changing Scottish Child Payment will continue, and the payment will rise with inflation from April. This means over £27 per week per eligible child in low-income families. A policy benefiting around 325,000 children in Scotland, including around 4,400 in East Kilbride. The Scottish Child Payment is one of the unique payments being delivered through the Scottish Government's social security system. Taken together, the Scottish Government's policies are estimated to be keeping 100,000 children out of poverty. But the SNP Government won't stop there. The previous Tory UK Government introduced the abhorrent two-child cap and rape clause. This policy has caused thousands of children to be living in poverty. And sadly, despite their promise of change, Keir Starmer's Labour Government is keeping this cruel measure. Instead, Scotland's SNP Government will scrap the Labour UK Government's two-child benefit cap in Scotland, lifting over 15,000 Scottish children out of poverty and ending a major driver of deprivation. In the face of Westminster inaction, Scotland's Government is taking the decisive action needed to ensure our country is fairer in the present and ready for the challenges of the future. The SNP's draft budget sets out investment right across the board, and one area which I know people in East Kilbride will be particularly pleased about is the increased investment in the Affordable Housing Supply programme. Thanks to the Scottish Government funding, we've seen many new houses and flats built right across the town in recent years. But with ongoing demand, I know people in East Kilbride will welcome the more than £767 million investment to deliver even more affordable homes. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the SNP Government's draft budget marks a turning point, delivery in the present and a hope for the future. It will support Social Security Scotland to increase the support it provides through disability benefits and the game-changing Scottish Child Payment.
Need to conclude.
This draft budget will also lay the groundwork to scrap the cruel two-child cap in Scotland. Save the Children is calling on Parliament to back.
I now call the final, the first speaker in the closing speeches, Maggie Chapman, up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to close this afternoon's debate on this important issue on behalf of the Scottish Greens. As we've heard, the draft budget includes some important provisions intended to help the thousands of children in poverty across Scotland. But cold and hungry children cannot wait. They cannot wait for Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer to decide that their self-imposed fiscal conditions have been met, that their friends in the City of London are comfortable enough, that their focus groups and spin doctors are edging towards common decency. The evil, and I don't use that word lightly, of the two-child limit must be abolished now, with immediate effect, not at some hypothetical point in a theoretical future. Every day that this UK Labour government fails to act represents a stain on its party history, a betrayal of its founding principles, a callous treachery towards the children of the UK and the families who struggle to keep them safe. It is entirely right, therefore, faced with such brutality, that the Scottish Government should act to mitigate it, to protect the children of Scotland from punishment, cruel and unusual punishment indeed, simply for being the third born or later in a family. This is essential life-saving work, which the Scottish Greens support with whole hearts and urgent endeavour. But it will not come soon enough for the families who need help now, and that's why more action is needed, as highlighted by many this afternoon, and organisations like Save the Children, Barnardo's, the Poverty Alliance and others. Children in Scotland need targeted support, and we in the Scottish Greens are proud of our role in making the Scottish Child Payment the transformational measure that it is recognised as so widely. That payment must be increased to £40 per week as soon as possible, as those and other organisations are calling for. Child poverty is family poverty and overwhelmingly the poverty of women, as Carol Mochan highlighted earlier. The End Child Poverty Coalition points out that families in poverty need holistic support, support that is financial but also practical and emotional, to find and keep good work, work that is secure, with decent pay and conditions, work that aligns with the responsibilities of family life, is difficult for all parents, but especially for single mothers. Combating child poverty means recognising those difficulties and properly funding those organisations and projects which provide expert support. The First Minister and others have spoken about the wide range of social security mechanisms we use in Scotland. It is my hope that we will see progress on the minimum income guarantee on the path to a universal basic income this year too. But we need more than just social security, as others have highlighted. We need policies and measures that address every aspect of family life, every source of strain on the family budget. It is no good giving with one hand what we take away with the other. We need a systemic and holistic approach. That means fundamentally making sure that families have a safe, secure and healthy home to live in and to stay in for as long as they need to. The work on affordable housing is very welcome, but again, it doesn't go far enough yet. Families will continue to live in privately rented accommodation, and they must be protected from unconscionable rent rises. If the Scottish Government is serious about child poverty, and I believe its intentions are, it must reconsider its housing bill amendments. Robust rent controls are essential tools in dismantling child poverty. Don't let the landlord lobby persuade you not to use them. And it means easing the financial burdens of ordinary life, the costs that accumulate day by day, weighing more and more heavily on the family budget, the parents' sleep, the children's diminishing happiness. That is why a £2 cap on bus fares that the Scottish Greens are calling for, which might seem trivial to privileged car owners, can mean the difference between accessible transport and impossible choices. The difference between saying yes to that job, that course, that kid's activity, and saying sorry, but again the answer is no. And it's why the rollout of universal free school meals really matters. For the families who don't get them now but need them, those for whom the burden of public debt is an unsupportable weight on their well-being. But also for those children who qualify now for free school meals, but for whom the pain of stigma is as sharp as the pain of hunger. Promises to children matter. We shouldn't discard them just when it's inconvenient. Finally, Presiding Officer, let us not forget those children who are too often forgotten, those whose families are branded with the cruelty of no recourse to public funds. We must ensure that local authorities and organisations that support migrant families, including those seeking asylum, have the resources they need to help those threatened with utter destitution. Indeed, we have a moral responsibility to do so. For human rights do not stop at borders or beaches. My hope for the new year is that we can find a new cooperation between all levels of government, Holyrood, Westminster and councils, that we will see an end to the divisive rhetoric of the lowest common denominator, and that together we can seed the ground upon which all our children will thrive, because poverty and inequality are bad for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Michael Manna up to 6 minutes. Mr Manna.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin this closing speech by wishing you a Happy New Year and to all colleagues around the Chamber. And I thank colleagues for the debate that we've had this afternoon. I want to begin by saying that there's very much the value in the First Minister's opening speech for today's debate. His contention was that this core issue of child poverty turns around a broad range of issues. It cannot be addressed by one policy, two policies, three policies. That is a choice of the totality of our politics that we make together. The positions that we take on a wide variety of issues. It's a position I agree with very strongly. Willie Rennie made the same point very well. And I have to say it echoed very much of the language of the Labour leader Anna Sarwar's speech he made at the University of Glasgow yesterday. That the Scottish child payment is vital. Is absolutely vital and it has our very strong support. But it is not alone enough, that more must be done. And I think it's clearly what the First Minister said. And of course in his speech, I don't think it was exactly the speech that he had intended to deliver perhaps yesterday in this debate today, because he now knows that the budget will pass. And that is a good thing. There have been very legitimate discussions around the budget between parties, and I have to say that those discussions, which all parties have been party to, do not facilitate populism and the rise of the far right, just as the Green Party said in the press yesterday. But I was interested in Patrick Harvey's reportage from my own discussions with the Scottish Government ministers. He was telling us what had happened in those rooms, very amicable discussions as they were. But perhaps if he still has a key for the room and was hiding behind the curtains, he didn't hear exactly the tone of those discussions and what happened, because those have been amiable and constructive discussions, and he was keen to know what the constructive proposition that we had brought to those discussions was. Well, I would say to him £5.2 billion, Presiding Officer, that has, in the words of the First Minister, given some hope. A budget that can have the potential to change people's lives in Scotland. And I would say that is potential. Certainly, sir.
Patrick Harvey.
I think perhaps both of us should check the official report on my speech, because he seems to have heard a very different speech than the one that I delivered. But perhaps he can simply clarify what is the budget concession that the Scottish Labour Party have successfully negotiated for in exchange for a commitment to abstain?
Michael Mara.
So what, in terms of the discussions, and the discussions that, Presiding Officer, in the discussions that we have held with the Scottish Government, what we have asked for is for Scotland to set a new direction and use that £5.2 billion. It's our belief that, frankly, the government's position, the direction that they've taken, does not go far enough in that regard. But we have to say that we think that this is a budget that does no harm. And at the moment, then, it asks the question, no thank you, sir, it asks the question, and the other part of the First Minister's formulation, alongside hope, is, of course, delivery. Yeah. And rightly, that is what the bulk of the debate today has been focused on. Can we deliver against our duties? And this is the first of three duties that I would set out, because we do have a legal duty in regard to child poverty, as they were set out in 2017, far prior to the arrival of colleagues in Parliament. And Paul O'Kane set out the concerns of many experts, including the Poverty and Equality Commission, who have said that progress on tackling child poverty has been slow or not evident at all under this SNP government. And this budget, again, whilst doing no harm, will not change that trajectory, because it lacks the new direction that Scotland needs. Secondly, we have an economic duty, and not only to produce an economy that deals with child poverty, but to recognise that any person lost to the lifelong impact of child poverty is reduced or squandered potential for the whole of our country and for the whole of our community. And at a time of an ageing population with a shrinking birth rate in Scotland, that is ever more important for our future as a country, and the cost of that poverty is ever greater. And finally, we do have a moral duty to recognise the innate equal value of every child. And that demands that we ask the broad question of the shape of our economy, our community and of all of our government policy. And again, Willie Rennie, I think, was right to raise the issue of drug deaths and addiction, which is a huge affliction in my home city of Dundee. But I cannot agree with what he said in terms of that Labour's track record on child poverty amounted to a fluctuation or a nudge of the dial. It was far more profound than that. It transformed lives in our previous time in government, and that it was a trend that halted in 2010, and that no government, either at Westminster since or here in Holyrood, has actually been able to match or reverse. So we do have to deal with those broad causes that many people have highlighted so far. The gap in attainment, the First Minister has to recognise that it has not been closed, let alone abolished. At a higher level, it's the greatest it has ever been. And the First Minister must recognise that, and he must deliver. We have a national housing emergency with 10,000 children waking up on Christmas morning just days ago in temporary accommodation. And we have to make sure that we have to recognise that our housing completions are at a historic low. And the First Minister must recognise that, and he must deliver. So I look forward to the ongoing meetings on the budget in the weeks to come, while we do believe that this budget has failed to set the new direction that we require for Scotland, which will now only come from a new government in 2026.
Thank you. And I call on Liz Smith. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. And can I begin by recognising the consensus that I think is across the chamber that tackling child poverty absolutely must be a priority. And can I also say that I think that the Scottish Child Payment has been a good policy. And I think it's been a good policy because I think the evidence is sufficient to prove that it is working. Now, by no means is it the panacea that will solve all the ills that affect us, but nonetheless, I do think that it has been an effective policy that has come through the evidence that has been given to the Finance Committee. It's come through the evidence that's been given to the Social Justice Committee. I think there is good evidence that it is reaching those most in need. I think that the take-up rate is good and it's rising. I think it's quicker and easier to administer than several other social security benefits. And we had no problem at all in supporting the child payment in January 2022 and in February 2024. But as my colleague Stephen Kerr rightly said and Willie Rennie rightly said in relation to jobs and in education respectively, it is not the panacea that will solve the problem, because we should really be tackling the root causes, because that's what this is all about. And I think it's very interesting that while some of the groups like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Poverty Alliance, Save the Children, they're all very keen on the policy of the Scottish Child Payment, but they're all pointing to the fact that that is never going to be able to solve the problem. And I want to make this point because I believe fundamentally that what we must do, what the Scottish Government must be doing, is to judge policies about their effectiveness. What is actually working? Where is the evidence to show that something is working? And, of course.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Liz Smith for giving way, because I welcome very much what she said about the impact of the Scottish Child Payment. That point is beyond dispute. I'm left a bit bewildered about the attack that is levelled on social security expenditure by her leader, because that is at the heart of Mr Finlay's charge to me of the areas of reduction in expenditure that should be undertaken. So I just don't follow how it's possible for Liz Smith to tell me, with the evidence, that this policy on the Scottish Child Payment works, but Mr Finlay is arguing for us to reduce social security expenditure.
Smith.
Well, if the First Minister had listened to what I was saying, it's not just about the evidence, First Minister. It's about the costings, the effectiveness of the policy plus the costings. Now, our point is that the Scottish Government has put an awful lot of its eggs in one basket
in terms of addressing what is the social contract with the people of Scotland, because that's the key argument that the Scottish Government is making. It's the key centrepiece of this budget, that it is the Scottish Government's proposal that that social contract matters more than anything else. Our perspective is that that social contract could only be properly paid for if there is an economic policy behind it that gives the sufficient revenues to be able to allow the Scottish Government to deploy the policies. And the problem that we've got just now, First Minister, and it comes through all the evidence that you get from the Scottish Fiscal Commission or from the Audit Scotland, Auditor General was at committee this morning, is that we cannot go on with the burden of the social security costs unless we are able to bring in far greater revenues and develop the economic growth that we have.
First Minister.
Liz Smith for giving way again, but I think that Liz Smith ignores the fact that the Government consistently since it's held office has balanced the budget and lived within the resources that we have available to us, and we have put to Parliament a budget that is perfectly sustainable in the financial year, which is our obligation and our duty to do so. So I struggle to understand how the Conservative position has any logic about it, because the Government is living within its means and is supporting people to overcome the negative effects of child poverty, which she and I are agreed need to be tackled. But her leader wants to slash.
Well, First Minister, there is a legal responsibility for the Scottish Government to balance a budget. But what the Scottish Conservatives are analysing is exactly what the position is of many of the economic analysts, who are pointing out, quite correctly, that we cannot go on delivering the size of the social welfare budget without extra money. We simply can't do it. And I would have thought, as First Minister, who has a reputation in the financial sector before he came into this Parliament, surely he understands the basic economics of that. But it's important. This is not me talking, First Minister. This is what all the analysts are saying. And therefore, we have a problem with the size of the welfare benefit system. And my point fundamentally is that if we're going to make progress on this, we have to be able to judge which policies work, which policies are not working so well. And that is based on evidence. And at the moment, I don't think that the Scottish Government is providing sufficient evidence that the social contract which they have built up with the people of Scotland is going to be able to deliver all the priorities that they would like to settle on without giving that fundamental basis to the economy. Now, Presiding Officer, I think I have a minute left, so I haven't said anything that I was going to say, but I will come back to it. I will come back to it. You know, I think these points are important to address. And can I finish, First Minister, on the point that the Auditor General raised with us at committee this morning? It's been raised several times. It's been raised in the Finance Committee. It's been raised in lots of other committees in the Parliament. The Scottish Government is getting itself into an awful lot of trouble because it is on short-term fixes. It's trying to address policy by short-term fixes. And we're getting told time and time again that those short-term fixes are not going to work because there is not the medium and long-term planning for financial sustainability. I think that's a very important message. We're not going to be able to tackle the root causes of child poverty unless we get that fiscal responsibility. And on that point, I will finish.
Thank you. And I call on Shirley-Anne Somerville to wind up to 9 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by welcoming all the contributions that have been made today as we discuss the importance of the Scottish Government to our mission to eradicate child poverty. Because this budget is unashamedly optimistic about bringing forward the investment that will put people on a more prosperous, sustainable footing that is fairer for all. And it's a budget that once again shows that the highest possible priority that this Government has placed on delivering action that will help eradicate that scourge of child poverty in Scotland. It commits more than £6.9 billion for benefits expenditure, almost £1.3 billion more than the UK Government gives to the Scottish Government for social security. And within that, £644 million of our package of benefits is only available here in Scotland. That's essential support, such as the Scottish Child Payment, putting more money directly into the pockets of low-income families, when we know that the cost of living crisis is still with many, many families and people in communities the length and breadth of the country. But we do know that eradicating child poverty won't be solved by social security alone. Claire Hawkey and others pointed to that 3 drivers of poverty that we've mentioned in Best Start, Bright Futures. But that's exactly why the budget does so much more than just social security when looking at eradication of child poverty. Whether it's the extension of the budget for the Fairer Futures partnerships, which in essence looks at that systemic change in our public services that we do need to see how we can deliver services better, more effectively, more efficiently to promote family wellbeing and maximise incomes, or whether it's the £90 million on devolved employability services, or the continuation of delivering of free bus travel to over 2.3 million people, including, of course, all under 22s and disabled people. Certainly.
Liz Smith.
Many of these measures are welcome, but would she also recognise that there have been cuts to successive budgets in areas of employability, of enterprise, of the economy budgets? Colleges were mentioned earlier. These are so important to the social mobility of Scotland and ensuring that people have better paid jobs. Is that something that the Scottish Government will at last turn its focus to?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, the investment in employability services has been protected this year, and the 25-26 budget sees a over 2% uplift on the 24-25 budget to the college resource allocation, and that's in recognition of the importance that colleges do play. And indeed, education overall is important, whether it's from early learning and childcare, the school clothing grant, the further expansion of free school meals, or the expansion of breakfast clubs. I absolutely recognise the importance that we must continue to place on education, right from our youngest citizens all the way up to our adult learners. And overall, Presiding Officer, this budget continues to commit over £3 billion a year to measures which will tackle poverty in our country. And I'd like to begin my reflections on some of the remarks that have been made by people today on a point of consensus with Paul O'Kane, which I hope to carry on as much as possible in 2025, but we shall see. But he's right to point out that there are better relationships with the United Kingdom government. To be fair, that's a low bar, given where we were, but there is demonstrably better relations that we have. But let's be very clear about the practical implications of that to the budget, because there's only a 1% real terms increase in the resource expenditure in 25-26. So that's the context of which we are in. At the same time as we see the devastating impact across the public sector, across the voluntary sector and of course the economy in general, on the impact of the employers' national insurance contributions. So yes, there has been improvements, but it would be fair to say there has been some disappointment as well. Patrick Harvey, I think, may already have won the best intervention of 2025 already for his intervention on Michael Mann. But he also, quite rightly, I think, points to the fact that the Scottish Child Payment is the single most effective policy to tackling child poverty. That's what the evidence has shown. And the UK Government should be learning from what has happened here. But I would also agree with Willie Rennie, and it's a point that we've made in the Chamber before, that the Scottish Child Payment has an impact, but it needs to be a bridge to further changes. It needs to be a bridge to other challenges, to other parts of government, to also help eradicate child poverty. He says he has more ideas. There was some mentioned in that speech, and of course we are keen to hear from him. Miles Briggs and others did point to some other ideas and suggestions. What I would say to all colleagues, of course, is the budget has not passed. We absolutely take nothing for granted. But let's be honest about the cost of what is being proposed. And let's also, with the best will of the Conservative contributions today, also have a little bit of embarrassment coming to us for more money to be spent on public services at the same time as their leader is asking for £1 billion worth of cuts to public services because of tax cuts. But when we look, Presiding Officer, at the speech that the First Minister made yesterday, talking about delivery and hope, that sets the tone for not just this budget, but the direction, of course, at the Government.
Cabinet Secretary, if I might. I think one or two colleagues have forgotten that New Year's resolution to not have conversations in the Chamber. I'd be grateful if all members could do the Cabinet Secretary the courtesy of listening. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister spoke about the fact that it's important to make the biggest difference now, but also to lay the foundations of a hopeful future. I would contrast that with, I think, genuinely disappointing and very disturbing new direction from Scottish Labour. I'm not sure whether the disappointment with some of the remarks led to the poor attendance in the Chamber today, but it was quite stark because we're now at the point where the Labour Party are talking not about social security being an investment in the people of Scotland, they're talking about handouts. Now, that was a phrase that was used by many Conservative contributions today. I would expect that. To hear that from a Scottish Labour leader is desperately, desperately sad, because Scottish child payment is a lifeline to people in Scotland. It's not a handout, it's an investment, and it's a lifeline to people. And that's why, when we had that meeting with stakeholders yesterday, with the First Minister and Cabinet talking to stakeholders, it was important that we listened to their priorities, and the budget will deliver on that. I'll give way.
Paul O'Kane.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. She spoke there again about this hope-filled approach to the budget, as though it is the first budget of this government. Can I ask where she has been for the last 17 years of budgets, which have decimated very often sectors in Scotland, particularly problematic for our local government? And can I just be absolutely clear, because I think it's a little disingenuous, because she has pointed out to me that we have debated this many times. We support the Scottish Child Payment, but we're clear, as everyone has been today in this debate, it cannot be the only lever we use to challenge poverty in this country.
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr O'Kane asked where I've been. I've been delivering the Scottish Child Payment as the eradication of child poverty is our way forward. And I've been here delivering solutions within the devolved situation. What a disappointment. I'm now here mitigating against a Labour government rather than a Tory government. That's exactly where I've been, Mr O'Kane. Because Labour sets out its new direction, and I'm exceptionally concerned about the direction that this is. But I'm also concerned about the fact that it seems to have changed, because within 24 hours, we've not to spend less on social security. Apparently Scottish Labour would actually vote for the budget if we spent more money, and we spent it quicker on social security. There seems to be a lack of any direction at all, rather than a genuinely new direction. But we will get on with delivering the mitigation for the two-child cap. It requires legislation, both here and at Westminster. It requires systems to be built. That work has already begun. We will accelerate that and that timetable if at all possible. And the Scottish Child Payment is an example of how exactly we've done that in the past. But, Presiding Officer, this budget is very important. The First Minister has laid out the implications for it not passing, and we take nothing for granted. Many members have spoken about the fact that child poverty should be an overarching mission of this Parliament. The right to do so. But you've got to take part in those constructive discussions, you've got to take part in costed discussions, and then you've got to do what Save the Children Scotland have said MSPs should do, and actually support the budget. Sitting on the sidelines, leaving it to others to reintroduce a universal pension age winter heating payment to mitigate the two-child cap.
You must conclude.
Just won't cut it. Members need to vote for this motion, vote for the Scottish Government, and join in this mission of the Scottish Government to eradicate child poverty in Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 16026 on committee membership. And I ask Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this will be put at decision time, and there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first is that Amendment 16003.4 in the name of Russell Finlay, which seeks to amend Motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 16003.4 in the name of Russell Finlay, which seeks to amend Motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget be agreed. And members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 16003.4 in the name of Russell Finlay is yes 30, no 92. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 16003.3 in the name of Paul O'Kane, which seeks to amend motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget be agreed? Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 16003.3 in the name of Paul O'Kane is yes 20, no 102. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney on tackling child poverty and inequality through the Scottish Budget be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 16003 in the name of John Swinney is yes 72, no 50. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. And the final question is that motion 16026 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on committee membership be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time. And we will move on to members' business in the name of Faisal Chowdhury.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy. Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.